Alright, it looks like we are now live. Let me go ahead and take a look at everything here, and it looks like we are now properly here. Looks like people are already starting to come in. Hello, Salt, how are you doing? Um, Today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing the free-to-play tier list that I've been working on for a little while now. Couple things regarding this particular tier list. This is a tier list centered around free-to-play power. Very important here. We are looking at free-to-play power. This means that a lot of characters that you see here will be in a different order than what you'd expect from a normal whale tier list, where certain characters gain significantly more power because they have access to weapons that a free-to-play would regularly not be able to. That is one of the reasons why a character like Futao, arguably one of the best characters in the game, in a free-to-play setting will not be as high as a character like Kokome, arguably one of the worst 5-stars in the game. The scales shift quite massively when we take a look at what a regular free-to-play person can accomplish. A lot of the scales are weighted towards exponential characters when we put them in a whale environment. When we do not have access to godlike artifacts, multiple constellations and 5-star characters, multiple refinements and 5-star weapons, that scale shifts quite a lot. Hence, the positioning of a lot of these characters. Another thing to note about this particular list is that just because a character is low on the list doesn't mean that character is unusable or unplayable. Characters are rated low in the list usually because the amount of investment needed for them is not really worth the amount of resources they provide to a team. One of the best examples we have right here is probably a character like Kaching. Kaching is not necessarily a weak character. She can do more than enough to clear pretty much the entire content in the game. The thing about Kaching is that the amount of resources that you need to invest into her in order to be able to do that content at the degree that other characters can do will be significantly higher, to such a degree that her rating drops down by quite a decent amount because of that. So with those two things out of the way, let's go ahead and let's go right into it, shall we? Starting out with the people at the top, because that is what everybody wants to hear. When it comes to tier lists, there are only two things that matter: who are the best and who are the worst. So let's go ahead and let's go right into who are the best characters we have right here, and we're going to be starting with probably the most decisive character in the entire tier list. The character that pretty much shapes the entirety of this list, and one of the best characters that we currently have in game. That being Shang Lee. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with Shang Lee. She is undoubtedly the most powerful character that free-to-play players have access to. Not only because she's one of the few characters that you actually get for free after completing the floor 3 of Spiral Abyss for the first time, but because she's also one of the best power characters that's currently available in-game. One of the reasons why Zhangling has been as popular as she has been, and she has been as dominant as she has been because of the scaling that her burst has. Pyronado is an incredibly powerful ability even at C0. The skill itself not only hits multiple times at the very beginning, but also leaves the Pyronado effect on the active character. It's the traditional tornado that you usually see when people are using Zhangling. This Pyronado is capable of attacking 8.5 times within the amount of time that the ability can be active. This essentially means that you can properly attack a single enemy about 8 times with Pyronado. Because it's an AoE ability as well, it is capable of hitting multiple enemies at the same time. The scaling of Pyronado is also incredibly high because of this. For the entire duration of a C0 Pyronado, at maximum level, you're going to be getting around 1,400% scaling against a single enemy. And that applies in the entire area of the Pyronado. If you're fighting multiple enemies, the scaling goes off the chart. Even if you're fighting a single enemy, the scaling is already really high at 1,400, plus the additional initial hit, which would place it somewhere around 1,600-ish. That's one of the reasons why Zhangling is so powerful. Because this is an ability that not only has already really high base scaling, but it's also pyro ability, which means that it can vaporize. And unlike most other pyro abilities, this one doesn't have an internal cooldown on the vaporize reaction. This means that as many times as you can hit an enemy affected by Hydro, that's as many times as you're going to get the Hydro application of Vaporize. Meaning that the entirety of this already high scaling ability can be multiplied by more than double. Once we place this into account, this is insanely high levels of scaling damage that can be applied for Shang Lee. Hence the reason why she has been as dominant as she has been. Her scaling is just off the charts. It is one of the strongest scaling abilities in the entire game, with only characters like Ayaka being able to even come close to it. Not even Ganyu is capable of dealing as much scaling damage as Zhangling can. Ganyu gets incredibly close, and she is significantly easier to apply, either, which is why she gets a lot of that the fame that she does. But when it comes to pure numbers, Zhangling is insane. Especially if you manage to get her C4, which increases the number of hits that you can do by pretty much double. At the C4, Pyronado can hit a single enemy up to 12 times, for a total scaling at level 10 of somewhere around 2,400. Slightly more, but around that mark. 2,400, which can be vaporized to increase it even further. Against a single enemy, you're already doing Ayaka levels of damage, but all of that is in a humongous AoE. Zhangling is without a doubt one of the most game-changing characters that we currently have available, and because of this, she is a character that pretty much shifts the entire list around her. One of the things you will notice on the list is that a lot of characters that can enable Zhangling, because they can enable Zhangling, they will be higher on the list than they would be otherwise. Which kind of brings me to the next character that we're going to be talking about. And one of the characters that's probably going to be the most relevant as it stands right now. Let's move over to the next one, Child. Child is going to be the next character that we're going to be getting in his rerun banner. And frankly, I'm going to be real, he's probably one of the better free-to-play characters that we currently have available. Child, when he came out, was seen as probably one of the most expensive characters that there were in the game. When Child came out, the way that Genshin's enemy design worked out, it favored long engagements in which DPS was the most valuable thing. That is not the case anymore. If we take a look at a lot of the enemies that we're fighting nowadays, a lot of those enemies are not only incredibly mobile, but a lot of the boss enemies have multiple immunity phases, which makes it very difficult for characters that have a kit centered around consistent DPS to actually do that consistent DPS. Because of this, we have seen a shift from as much consistency as possible to as much burst as possible. Right now, the characters that are mostly favored are either characters that can lock down enemies and maintain that consistent DPS, or characters that can just burst down enemies within a short period of time. We're starting to see this shift more and more, especially as Spiral Abyss floors becomes more and more difficult. And the good thing about Child is that build that he used to have, where the consistent damage was the biggest part for him, that was the C6 build. That used to be the preferred build. But now that that has changed, his C0 build, which was the burst damage version, has become the more preferable one. And because of this, this build used to have a couple weaknesses, mainly that there was not really any artifact sets that would work well with him, and that he had a hard time finding a proper weapon that he could use. Both of those issues have been completely fixed. Not only that, but there has also been multiple additions that have made him even more friendly as a free-to-play player. Pretty much almost every single character that we have gotten in the past couple of months has in one way or another been able to influence Child for the better. Pretty much every single character that we've gotten since Inazuma's release, since before that even, has been a proper character that Child can work well with. One of those characters as well being the Electro Traveler, which usually manages to help a lot of the issues that Child team compositions used to have, which was poor energy recharge and poor energy generation. With that out of the way, and with characters like Ryden and the Electric Traveler, which is the more free-to-play option, the Child is just an insane character that works around really, really well. Especially because he is probably one of the best side replicators in the game right now. And that boosts him in a quite massive manner because of the previous character, Shang Ling. Shang Ling and Tartaglia, Child, however you want to call him, are an incredibly powerful combo that work really well with each other. Not only is Shang Ling capable of permitting Child to vaporize his first burst, but Child is capable of permitting Shang Ling to vaporize her entire Pyronado. And as we've discussed already, Pyronado is insane. A fully vaporized Pyronado at rank 10 is somewhere around 4,800 pyro damage in terms of scaling. 4,800 scaling for pyro damage. It's insane. This is also on a character that's capable of having 15% pyro resist destruction as well as 15% extra pyro damage. Another important part is that Shang Ling's burst can also snapshot, which is a pretty massive deal nowadays. There's just so many good synergies between these two characters that it's difficult not to put him at S+. He is a character that does not need constellations, not anymore. He's a character that's really easy to get teammates around because you get Shang Ling for free, you get the Electric Traveler for free. If you start playing around-ish when Inazuma came out, you also got Baido for free, which is another character that works really, really well with the rerun arc, as Indimin is saying. Child is just a character that fits really, really well into a free-to-play spectrum. When it comes to weaponry as well, pretty much every single bow in the game is a bow that favors Child in one way or another. Wind Blue Mode works with Child. Stringless works with Child. Favonius Warbow works with Child. Hanayumi works with Child. Rust works with Child. Every single 5-star bow works with Child. When it comes to weaponry, there is not a single weapon that Child cannot use properly. It's kind of ridiculous when you look at it that way. He is capable of using almost everything to a proper degree. The only exception would probably be like the sacrificial bow or something like that. But with that out of the way, he really is just that good of a character. He fits into most of anything that anybody would want. And as a starter character, he is probably one of the best options that you can get for a single 5-star that will give you a massive boost in the game. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next one, which is also an amazing character that a lot of people should definitely try to go for. Shang Lee. Shang Lee. There's a lot that can be said about Shang Lee, from his release, his history, all of that stuff. But the main thing that I can say about Shang Lee right now is that he's probably also one of the better characters that a free-to-play person can get at the very beginning that will maintain its relevancy in the later stages of the game. The good thing about Shang Lee is that his shield is absolutely ridiculous right now. After his buffs, he has easily become one of the best characters not only in offense but also in defense that you can possibly go for. In terms of offense, his kit has always been really, really good for a physical DPS build, with things like the Crescent Pike. He has always been really good in that department as a consistent damage source that's capable of doing that. On the support department, his shield now provides 20% elemental resistance reduction around him for every element. This means that his shield will be able to give every single party member, regardless of what attribute they are using to attack, a 20% damage boost in most cases. In some cases it might be slightly more, in some cases it might be slightly less. But that amount of consistency is absolutely insane. Not to mention that his shield is the strongest shield currently in the game. Not only does it provide interruption resistance, which means that you're not going to get staggered as much, but it also has just an insane amount of health that can literally be distinguished not in hit points, but in lives. It has more than enough health that the way that I describe it, I don't describe it with hit points, I describe it with how many Dionas of health it can take. With the average build, the DPS build, being able to take 2 full Dionas of health of damage. This is the DPS build. If you go heavily into the shield, you will more or less become completely immortal. At least until the new enemies come out, right? But yeah, Shang Lee is without a doubt one of the strongest characters we have right now, not only because of his supportive abilities, but also because of the DPS department that he can accomplish. While the physical DPS variant is not going to be breaking any records or any sort, it is a very cheap variant that you can go on early on to just do the damage that you need to do. This particular build also is very conducive to a lot of powerful supports, such as Baido and Shincha, alongside something like Fischl, for extra damage. It works really well early on, and that is definitely something that will carry a lot of players as they are starting into the game. If they don't have characters like Bennett, if they don't have characters like Sucrose, if they don't have some of the more powerful hyper carries that they can obtain like Ayaka, Ganyu, or Yoi Mia. The physical variant of Shang Lee is definitely a gap filler that will allow you to gather those resources, which is incredibly important early on, especially. His E description alone takes a whole screen. Yeah, his E is absolutely insane. It is probably one of the craziest abilities we currently have in game, and it's one of the abilities that will likely become better as the game keeps moving forward. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize at the moment is just how high the resonance damage can actually scale. At the moment, we don't see it that much because there are very few characters that can take advantage of the resonant damage of the pillar, with the only real one being the Geo Traveler. As we keep on getting more characters that are capable of summoning Geo constructs that are independent from the maximum cap, we are going to be seeing a lot of Geo builds surrounding the pillar come up in the future. Right now, we can't enable it, but as more Geo characters come around, we might be able to break the game entirely with that ability. It is my #1 ability that's just waiting to be broken. It takes a single character to make this part of the ability just absolutely ridiculous. Hi Portals, did I come at the end of the stream? No, we're actually just starting. I'm gonna be real, I don't like starting with the bottom. I'm gonna be starting with the best characters, and then I'm gonna be saving the gutter. I'm gonna be saving the bottom of the gutter for last. Because, oh boy, is there a lot of things that I want to say about Amber. But anywho. Shang Lee, just an amazing character all around that's really, really good for pretty much every level of play. If you're just starting out, he will help you get to a very powerful position relatively easily. If you're already really high invested into a lot of different characters, his amount of survivability as well as the amount of extra damage that he can provide, not only through the use of his innate abilities, but also through the use of sets like the Archaic Petra or the Tenacity of the Midlith, will be very valuable for a lot of people. So, if you have the chance of getting Shang Lee, definitely one of the most valuable characters that you can get at any point in time. And speaking of value, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? Ayaka. Ayaka. Kamisato Ayaya. There's a lot of things to say about Ayaka, but the best thing that I can say about her is that she's just good. She's incredibly powerful. Probably has one of the best bursts currently in the game with the highest amount of procs within a short amount of time. The way that Genshin has been progressing since the release of Inazuma, we have seen a move away from wanting as much consistent damage as possible to us wanting as much burst as possible. It is for a myriad of reasons, with one of the most common ones being the increased mobility of enemies. A lot of enemies have dodge mechanics now. A lot of enemies have immunity frames that are difficult to accomplish. A lot of enemies float around the battlefield and they just move around in an increasingly difficult manner to fight them. Because of this, characters that used to be really good, that used to be able to do a lot of damage, cannot do that. Not because their damage is gone, the damage is still there, but they just can't hit the enemies. And that has been a problem that's probably going to be exacerbated the more the game keeps on going on, as miHoYo seems to be quite fond of teleportation as of late, to my dismay and the dismay of many people I would pursue. But that is a shift in trend that we're starting to see. A lot of enemies are no longer just standing in place, they're not actually going against you. A lot of enemies are actively running away from you, making it really hard for melee characters to fight. So when we saw a melee character that didn't seem to have that many good abilities. A lot of people were understandably worried. However, Ayaka's burst is probably one of the best suited for this particular scenario, just their entire kit as a whole. One of the biggest issues right now is dealing with the increased mobility that enemies have, and Ayaka is really, really powerful in that regard, because every single one of her abilities can apply the cryo status, which makes it really easy to freeze enemies in place and deal with them that way. Not only that, but her burst, as I mentioned, has some of the most insane scaling that we have seen from any character, period. At level 10 of the ability, I'm pretty sure that her burst is somewhere around like, what was it, like 3,900? 3,900% scaling just from pressing an ability, not having to do anything. This is without taking into account things like melt, this is without taking into account any other boost that you could possibly accomplish through Venereer or even the application of Mona. Ayaka is probably one of the strongest characters that we have right now. And she actually works really well with a lot of different characters, which is something that other powerful cryo units we have had, like Ganyu, don't really mesh well with other characters. Ayaka fixes that problem. Ayaka is really good with Shincha, she's really good with Sucrose, she's really good with Bennett, she's good with pretty much every single one of the top tier supports that we currently have in the game, which makes her a very valuable pickup for a lot of players, especially on the free-to-play department, since a lot of our best weapons can actually be craftable. The weapon that we got from Inazuma, I'm not even going to try to mention the name, Anemona Kageuchi? Something like that. Amenoma Kageuchi. It is probably one of her best 4-star weapons, and it is a craftable that not only increases the amount of energy that she gets, but also significantly increases her amount of damage. She's very accessible in pretty much every single play, and she also works with Shang Lee. That build is not that preferred due to the increased mobility that I mentioned. It can be very difficult to keep up with a lot of the enemies if you're going for that build, because it disrupts Ayaka's biggest strength, which is the freeze, the amount of freeze, but it does increase Zhangling's damage by a significant amount. These two together can do a lot of damage. Just both of their bursts together, that's almost like 10,000% scaling. It's insane. These two are a powerhouse by themselves, and each and every single one of them can pretty much make an entire team around them, just because of how powerful that burst is. Her other skills, they're also pretty good. Her normal attacks are nothing to laugh at. They can do quite a bit of damage, and as we are starting to see a bigger focus on elemental shields as well, being able to trigger the amount of elemental reactions that Ayaka can, with freeze in particular, has become very, very valuable. If anybody has been having troubles with the Abyss Herald in particular, Spinny Water Boy, and you fight him with Ayaka, you will see just how impactful her infusion can actually be in that fight. Her application of cryo is completely unmatched. There is not a single character that can stand up to that. The only character that even comes close is Ganyu, and even she struggles to apply as much cryo as Ayaka can. Incredibly powerful character that's unlikely to be power crept in any form of way. Her damage is just way too high, and her utility with cryo is also completely insane. Incredibly powerful character. If you have the chance, definitely one of the characters to look out for. So now, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, a character that a lot of people hated on for quite a while. Frankly, I don't know why. This character is absolutely insane. I'm gonna lie to you, I do know why, and we'll discuss that in a bit, but let's go ahead and let's talk about Yoi Mia. Yoi Mia is probably one of the craziest characters that we have, and it's kind of sad to see how much hate she ended up getting on her release. It's understandable why she ended up getting that bad press, but I'm gonna be real with it. She is probably one of the strongest characters that a free-to-play player can get without having to spend too much. A C0 Yoi Mia will be so powerful with just the right weapon equipment. Things like Hanayumi really bring out a lot of power from Yoi Mia. Things like Rust really break Yoi Mia as a whole. When it comes to free-to-play power, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that as a free-to-play player, you're not going to be able to get a lot of that exponential increase that a lot of whales can. A lot of the exponential increase that a lot of people get from Genshin, if you know how the damage formula works, trying to explain it a bit in Damage Explained, that's probably going to be the last video that I do regarding that factor. Essentially, the way that Genshin damage works, it's an exponential scale. The more multipliers that you add, the more damage that you will do. However, a lot of those multipliers are usually locked behind 5-star weaponry as well as constellations, and there really isn't anything in the game that can replace that. If you don't have the constellations, if you don't have the rank 5 weaponry, you're kind of out of luck. There's no real way to increase your damage power. There's only so much power that you can get from artifacts. At some point or another, you won't be able to increase that power limit without using other characters, without using constellations, without using rank 5 weaponry. Yoi Mia is one of the few characters that doesn't care about any of that. Yoi Mia at C0 is almost as powerful as she is at C6. C6 is actually very strong, but that's completely out of the way. C0 Yoi Mia is very, very powerful, and she doesn't really need rank 5 weaponry either. The rust by itself at maximum refinement, which is not something that's difficult to accomplish, is already comparable to a lot of the 5-star weapons at maximum refinement as well. It is a very strong boost for Yoi Mia in particular because of the way that her kit works. She has an insane, absolutely insane damage bonus on her elemental skill. Hanavi Fire Dance, Hawabi? I don't remember. Her elemental skill is probably the strongest buff in the game, and I am counting Futao's in this. I'm pretty sure that Yoi Mia's buff is so much stronger. It pretty much means that whenever you activate this skill, every single one of your normal attacks is pretty much going to be counted as a crit. That's how much power it gives it. It pretty much instantly fulfills all of the requirements that you can get from extra attack power by giving you like 160 of it. If you pair this with the exponential nature of crits, if you pair this with the exponential nature of attack power, as well as the damage bonuses that you can get from something like pyro resistance down, Yoi Mia can very easily destroy everything in the game with very minimal investment. She doesn't really care too much about what artifacts that you're using on her. A lot of people use Suminawas, that's fine if you want to get the extra damage. A lot of people use Crimson Witch Flames, that's also fine. A lot of people tend to go for Thunder... what's the name of the game? Thunderbird's Mercy, something like that? Thundering Fury, that one. In order to have maximum uptime on Yoi Mia, whichever version you go for, Yoi Mia will still do an insane amount of damage at pretty much every point. You can pretty much go even without a set, and as long as you can manage to fulfill her crit ratio requirements, Yoi Mia will do a lot of damage. She's one of the few set-independent characters, where if you can get something for her, it will be nice, but it won't be game-breaking. It's not something that you absolutely need in order to get a good Yoi Mia, and that's what makes her so good. She gives you an insane amount of power without needing that much investment. You don't need multiple constellations. You don't need insane amounts of teammates. Yoi Mia by herself just has that much power alone. And on the teammate department, she actually works really well with a lot of powerful characters. Pair her with Official, and she will absolutely destroy everything in her path with Overloaded alone. She's an insane character. The main thing that does drag her down is that she is single target. All of her damage is going to be mostly single target, and when it comes to the way that her playstyle goes, she is an archer. And a lot of the things that have been true for archers for the longest time are still true for Yoi Mia. Their range is kind of weird, the targeting is messed up in a lot of places, it can be hard to deal with it. So, while she is probably one of the strongest characters that we have right now, at least on the free-to-play spectrum, because her ceiling is fairly low in comparison to other characters, mainly because her Vaporize is not as high value as others. That doesn't really matter when we're looking at free-to-play, because we're not getting there anyways. We just don't have the exponential nature that whale players do. There is a very hard cap to how much power you can extract out of certain characters. And because of that hard cap, characters that would normally have a low ceiling, they don't really exist because that high ceiling that players are seeing when they start whaling doesn't really apply to us. It's already an unattainable state. So if there's no point in trying to get there, why should we worry about it? This is where Yoi Mia comes in. She almost instantly gets to that ceiling without much of a fuss, which is why I honestly see her as probably one of the best free-play characters that you can give somebody starting out. Right there with Ayaka when it comes to terms of power. Ayaka's probably better, mainly because she has more utility, but both of them have a lot of utility to them. The pyro element right now doesn't really have a lot of strong elemental reactions apart from Vaporize. Overloaded is pretty decent, but I do expect that to change when we get Dendro. So when we get Dendro, Yoi Mia is probably going to be seeing a massive power boost as well, as she's probably the best applicator of Pyro that we currently have at the moment. But yeah, that's enough for Yoi Mia. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the next characters, shall we? And the next characters that we're going to be dealing with the support trio. Pretty much these three characters are the apex of supporting potential in Genshin. We're going to be starting out with probably the most well-known and the most powerful one, Bennett. A lot of people are high on Bennett. I'm just going to say that right now. A well-built Bennett is a drug that a lot of people get addicted to. And it's understandable why. He, at maximum power, gives almost 1,000 extra attack power to every single character on the team. Because of the snapshotting mechanic, this 1,000 power can also be saved for a lot of long duration abilities, such as Shang Lee, such as Baido. This is not a small amount of power. This is a lot. It really increases the amount of power that a lot of characters can accomplish, and it does push them past that power mark that it's very difficult to get to. The only way that you can get 1,000 extra power is by investing very, very heavily into the attack stat. There's not many characters that can get just extra 1,000 power without having to invest super heavily into. Bennett fixes that issue, which means that a lot of characters that have an exponential nature, whether it be because they have a very high amount of crit innately or because they have a very high amount of extra damage multipliers innately, like Yoi Mia, Bennett can bring out that extra power without much of a fuss. And because of that, just adding 1,000 power into the multiplier scale increases quite a lot. And that's one of the reasons why Bennett is seen as such a powerful character. On top of this, he's also a healer, and one of the better healers at that. His healing rate, while it can only heal you up to 70%, is probably one of the highest ones in the game. The only one that can really compare is probably Chi-Chi and Kokome, and Kokome struggles to get that high. Barbara can kinda get to that point as well, but Barbara is a bit iffy, since she relies a lot on the burst. It's kind of a weird balance, but Bennett ends up being one of the best healers we have in game, at least from a desperation standpoint. If you need a quick heal, Bennett is probably going to be the guy that's going to get you back to full the quickest. Apart from characters like Jean and Barbara, that pretty much only have a heal on their bursts. In comparison, Bennett has a very, very powerful attack boost, a very, very powerful heal, and one of the strongest applications of Pyro that we have available right now. Since his Pyro duration is like 6 or 7 seconds, somewhere around that mark, which makes it so that some certain characters can actually double proc melt off of just a single attack from Bennett. Overall, he has the makings of a really strong character, and he's not only a support, he can also play the role of DPS to a very effective degree because of his abilities. If you use a DPS Bennett, it is very much possible to spam his elemental skill. As it stands right now, Bennett is probably the only elemental skill DPS in the game. A character that can spam his elemental skill instead of other abilities in order to get that DPS. A just a regular Bennett can use this elemental skill every 2 seconds. If you invest very heavily into that, you can probably get it to every 1 second you can spam that ability. I probably wouldn't recommend that build. It is probably less efficient than a more vaporize-centric one, but it is still very powerful nonetheless. And because of all of that, he's just insane. He can also be obtained from the shop that resets around every 6 months, so getting him is not really that big of a problem either, since just waiting, you are pretty much guaranteed to be able to see him in the shop at least once. And getting him equipped is probably his weakness, his biggest weakness, and that's not really that big of a deal, since you're eventually going to get him to level 90. You're eventually going to get his weapon to level 90 as well. That's probably the biggest hurdle for Bennett, and that is something that just kind of happens with time. So it's not really that much of a negative, as much as it is just kind of like a waiting period for him. Bennett is probably one of the strongest characters that we have right now, and he most certainly deserves being in the S+ department when it comes to just characters in game. When it comes to equipment, that is probably where he used to struggle the most. He still kind of does, as there really isn't that many weapons that work well with him. The best one that you can equip Bennett is probably going to be the Iron Sting from the Craftal department. There's a couple options from the gacha system, mainly things like Lion's Roar, which also work fairly well for them. But if you can't obtain them, Iron Sting is probably your best bet. He still has a weapon that works well with him, so that's pretty good. You do want to upgrade your Bennett as soon as possible and try to get a 5-star weapon on him. Any 5-star weapon will do. The only really important thing that matters for Bennett is that base attack. He is very flexible. Very, very flexible. Bennett, what can you do? Yes, indeed. So, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? Much in a similar way as with Bennett, this character is probably responsible for a lot of the most powerful characters we have in-game right now, and that is Shincha. Shincha is currently the main enabler that a lot of people are using in order to proc Vaporize. Vaporize has been widely known to be one of the strongest abilities, one of the strongest reactions we currently have in-game, and that can be attributed almost entirely to Shincha. Shincha makes triggering Vaporize almost trivial. He, as long as his burst is active, will pretty much maintain the Hydro element on whatever enemy you're attacking. And because of that, he is able to allow for full vaporizations of the entire character's kits. Vaporize on Diluc was seen as very, very powerful because of Shincha, not because of Diluc. Vaporize on Futao is seen as very powerful, not because Futao is powerful, but because Shincha enables it to be powerful. Vaporize on Zhangling. Shangling is actually powerful by herself, so this is kind of different, but it ends up being as powerful as it is because a character like Shincha exists. And another character that we have right here in this particular scale is as powerful as he is because he can replicate what Shincha can accomplish. That's kind of the thing that makes these characters really powerful. Hydro as an element is very, very good, as it can enable pretty much 2 of the strongest reactions. When it comes to electro-based reactions, Electrocharge is the strongest out of the bunch, and that's so happens to be the one that Shincha enables. When it comes to multiplicative reactions, Vaporize is the one that gets the most attention because it's the one that has the easiest access to because of Shincha. All around, he's just a character that fits really well into almost any of the top builds that you can enable. If we take a look at a lot of the builds that people are using to clear Spiral Abyss, most of them will have Shincha in one way or another. He's just that efficient of an enabler. And his biggest weakness tends to be low energy recharge. He doesn't have that many ways of getting energy, so a lot of people tend to use him with things like Sacrificial Sword, Favonia's Sword, and a lot of people are also experimenting in giving him the Emblem Severed Fates in order to increase the amount of energy recharge that he gets without sacrificing his damage too much. If you can manage to fix that energy issue in whatever way that you can, any of the above, or using him with someone like Ryden, he becomes one of the strongest characters we have as well. His scaling is also not that low. His scaling for his burst is kind of insane. I'm pretty sure that at maximum efficiency, assuming C6 as well. His burst has like 8,000% scaling, almost double what Zhangling does. The thing about that though is that there's very few ways of actually increasing that burst damage, so it doesn't tend to be as impactful as other characters. Nonetheless, it is a lot of damage, and because it is a lot of damage, you can definitely see quite a few numbers popping up from that. It is very difficult to get maximum efficiency out of Shincha. There's very few characters that can do that, so the ones that can tend to be some of his best pairings, which brings me to the next character, which is one of the characters that can take full advantage of Shincha, that being Sucrose. Sucrose is insane. I'm gonna go ahead and leave that right now. If you were to ask me what is the best anemo character in the game, I will tell you Sucrose. What is the reason for this? The reason why I consider Sucrose to be one of the best... No, I'm just gonna say it. The best anemo character in the game is she does everything. She has a very strong CC. Her scaling is very high in every single department. As a Catalyst Juicer, she has constant procs of Swirl. The Venerier set works wonders on her. She's probably the best applicator of Venerier in the game. And she also has a natural elemental mastery buff for every single character on the party. There are very few things that Sucrose cannot do. A C6 Sucrose can also buff elemental damage bonuses for the team. If you need a healer, you can equip Prototype Amber. If you need an energy battery, you can equip her with Prototype Amber, and there you go, you now have a better Venti. If you are using an Electro team, you can use the Hakushing ring to increase power even further. If you just need extra attack power, you can equip the Tails of the Dragon Slayer, and there you go, you have extra attack power. Not to mention the Venerier set, not to mention the Elemental Mastery, not to mention the high scaling that she has on every single one of her abilities. Sucrose is probably one of the most overlooked characters when it comes to tiers of power, and she is likely just the strongest anemo character. A lot of people right now think that character is, oh god, what's his name? Kazuha. I would disagree. I think Sucrose does pretty much the exact same thing that Kazuha does, to a more impactful degree, with stronger CC, with better cooldowns, and significantly more utility. I think if you're looking for an emo, Sucrose is your bro. I don't think there's gonna be a character as powerful as Sucrose that doesn't just become Sucrose 2.0. I'm pretty sure that Sucrose is at the limit of what a Nemo can deliver. Everything that you could possibly want, Sucrose can give. And that is what makes her so strong. She is incredibly flexible. Anything that you need, you just need to give Sucrose a different weapon, and she can accomplish that. And that's what makes her so strong. But with that out of the way, we have pretty much finished with the S+ tiers of characters. So let's go ahead and let's move over to the characters that just missed the mark ever so slightly for whatever reason. And we're going to be starting with one of my favorite characters, actually, that being Albedo. Albedo is honestly a very, very strong unit. Very underappreciated by the community as well. The things that make Albedo really good is that he is one of the few characters that can do a majority of its damage without being on the field. His Solar Isotoma, with a free-to-play build, I'm talking a literal 3-star weapon as his weapon of choice, can already deal well above like 12,000 damage every 2 seconds. That is a significant amount of damage that during an entire fight will be quite a lot. Think about it this way. The duration of the Isotoma lasts for 30 seconds. If you're hitting for 12,000 damage every 2 seconds, that means that for its entire duration, you're going to be hitting about 15 times. That is like 160,000 damage that he's doing just by pressing a button. This is without mentioning that if you're using an elemental team, you're able to get not only damage bonuses from things like a Cracked Petra or the Tenacity of the Millith, but also Crystallize. Crystallize it got a buff in 1.6, and it is a buff that a lot of people have not really noticed that much, because they haven't gone into the math that much. With a tenacity of the Millilith, and an Albedo, a crystallized shield with a small amount of EM, I'm talking just what the Albedo provides, can give you a 5,000 mitigation shield every 2 seconds. If you are taking more than 5,000 damage every 2 seconds, dodge! Pretty much kind of the case. His shielding capabilities with Crystallize are the strongest in the game. He's very capable of counteracting a lot of elemental enemies just by triggering Crystallize on them. He's capable of buffing the team in a myriad of ways, having one of the stronger EM buffs that we have available, as it is part of the base kit, and his base damage alone, being centered on defense, makes him really easy to build in a lot of ways. My Albedo, which I consider to be very, very strong, has 2 defense artifacts equipped on him. He doesn't have a crit rate relic or a crit damage one on the circlet, and he's still doing a significant amount of damage. Albedo is probably one of the cheapest characters that you can get for extra damage, that will bring some of the better benefits in the game, and will just boost your entire team in ways that you don't expect. A lot of his damage is on the background, so it's not as flashy as things like hitting for 100k on Ryden or something of the sort, but that damage adds up. During an entire fight, he will do that much damage. Think about it this way, Ryden's cooldown is like 20 seconds. During those 20 seconds, Albedo is already likely doing just as much damage as Ryden, if not more. And Ryden is not a weak character, she's also on the S tier. The best way of looking at Albedo is that he doesn't do that much in a single second, but because of how high the range on his Sasutoma is, because of how much defense that he provides, because of how much boosts he is capable of giving, he really does increase the damage of a team by a significant margin. Especially if you can enable things like the Geo Resonance by pairing him with a character like Shang Lee. Those two as a core are probably some of the strongest supports that we have available. And you will see a lot of top whale builds use those two because of that. Despite not having any constellations, these two resonating together with each other do provide a lot. It is not a small amount. If you can manage to get both of those characters, you will see a massive spike in damage in a lot of your teams. Definitely a character that should not be underestimated. He brings a lot to a team. His greatest weakness, if you can call it a weakness, is that Crystallize sometimes makes reactions a bit weird, but because of how strong a lot of the elemental applicators we have, it honestly never comes up. Not only that, but whenever he crystallizes, he doesn't really take that much away from reactions. He only takes away like a second away from most reactions, which in a lot of cases won't stop you from triggering reactions. Unless you're really, really slow, which is unlikely to happen in a game as fast as Genshin. Alfredo has a high run again, yep. Imagine Petro with Millilith mechanic, oh my god, that would be so good. I can only hope that would happen at some point in the future. I'm gonna be realistic, it's unlikely that it's ever gonna happen. It wouldn't even be that complicated. I could probably do it in like 30 minutes. Then again, I guess that will require quite a bit of time on actually updating a server, so I can kind of imagine why. Frankly, any MiHoYo employee during their maintenance could make some of the biggest buffs in the game without having to change the code that much, and it would only probably take them like 30 minutes. They could legitimately change the entire game of Genshin within 30 minutes, and the only reason why they're not doing that is probably because the people up top are not letting them. There are so many easy changes that could be done, that being one of them, having the Archaic Petra trigger in the same way as Millilith, and I can only imagine that's not happening because somebody at the top is saying, we're not going to risk you crashing the server for another hour because one of the upgrades didn't go through properly. Alas, we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening. But yeah, that's enough about good old Beta Boy. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the next one. A character that a lot of people regard as one of the strongest characters in the game, with a good reason, that being Ganyu. We're likely to get a banner for her sometime in the future, so it's probably a good thing to talk about her. Is Ganyu strong? Yes, undeniably. Is Ganyu a good free-to-play character? Yes, also true. Where are the caveats? Because a character this strong cannot be without its caveats. And this is true. Ganyu, for a free-to-play player, will not be that hyper carry that a lot of people tout her to be. She just isn't. For a free-to-play player, Ganyu is still incredibly strong, but she's not a character that will one-shot everything. She's not a character that will go around killing everything that she sees. She will kill them, but just not as fast as you would imagine. A free-to-play Ganyu does cap off fairly early on. If you want to do a lot of damage with her charge attacks in particular, you're going to need the ammo spell. If you want to do a lot of damage with her burst, which is what a lot of whales tend to do, you will need a lot of support. She's not as free-to-play friendly as people would make you believe. Both of her builds are either the charge shot build or the elemental burst build, and both of those have their caveats. The charge shot build, while strong, will not be incredibly powerful unless you have the ammo spell. The ammo spell is Ganyu's biggest power spike in the entire game. So if you don't have that weapon, I would probably not recommend that one. If you're going on the other side, she does have one of the strongest compositions in the game that a lot of people refer to as Morgana, but that composition is a composition that not only requires a specific standard banner character, but also needs a very powerful battery already fully built alongside Venti. And while there's other characters that can also work, like Kazuha, even Sucrose to a lesser degree, all of these are expensive. Ganyu doesn't work that well with many characters. Out of the entire support trio, the only one that really kinda works is Bennett. And it can be very difficult to fully apply Bennett into the Ganyu build. The melt version of Ganyu is probably the way to go for a free-to-play player, and that version does have a lot of downsides to it. A lot of the damage is very, very slow, and on a game that keeps on becoming faster and faster, that is a pretty big disadvantage. All around though, the damage that Ganyu brings is just that high. It is actually a lot. Being able to hit for like 30,000 damage every 2 seconds is not a small feat. There's not that many characters that can do that without the use of a lot of supports, a lot of 5-star weaponry, or just insane combos altogether. So for Ganyu to be able to do that without any assistance, it is actually fairly impressive. A couple things regarding Ganyu. She is very strong. She's incredibly boring to play. She has a lot of weaknesses. She is very slow. And unless you have a very strong shield, you're probably going to be getting thrown around everywhere. That is just kind of what it is for charge attack archers. They take a long time to get off. They do a lot of damage, but it usually needs very, very heavy amounts of setup. So keep that in mind if you're going for Ganyu. She's very strong, but she has a lot of weaknesses. Weaknesses that people in higher tiers of play don't really care about because they have a lot of CC, they have a lot of damage. They don't have to worry about stuff like that. For people who are just starting out, people who are not paying money into the game, or who are paying a very small amount, Ganyu is not going to be the silver bullet that you're looking for. You're probably going to be getting a lot more mileage out of other characters. She is a hyper carry at the end of the day. She's one of the squishy hyper carries. She does have her mechanic where she can draw aggro out of other individuals, but I'm going to be honest with you, that mechanic is incredibly unreliable. It works well against some enemies, but not everything. She has a lot of counter plays. She is very flexible. She can do a lot of things. Just keep in mind the weaknesses. She's not a perfect character by any means. They're fixing the opacity of Shang Lee's shield for her. Yeah, I saw that. That was, oh boy, talk about tone deaf. Tone deaf announcements. The next couple patches are definitely going to blow up in their face unless they start buffing some characters. We need to see actual buffs come into the game. Otherwise, the frustrations are just going to stack up too much. A lot of people are memeing around with the rift-bound wolves. If they end up teleporting as much as the enemies that we currently have, they're going to become an issue really, really quickly. I think right now we have, what is it, like 12 enemies that can cover half the map in a fraction of a second. Genshin is just becoming way too fast. They really need to slow down on the teleports. They need to slow down on the mobility of enemies. It is becoming very frustrating to fight anything without a freeze team. It's just that bad. You either one-shot everything, or you freeze them to death, or you die. That's kind of how it is right now in Genshin. And I do plan on doing a piece on that sometime in the future. I just have a lot of things on the backlog that I want to finish. This being one of these. These being one of them. I've been working on this probably for like a month, if not more. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Albedo, best character in the game, can't change my mind. He is incredibly powerful. I think Albedo is easily one of the easiest characters that you can play with. Hello, don't worry about it. We're pretty much just halfway, we're not even halfway through. But let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? Rosaria. Rosaria. She has always been very strong from a lot of different perspectives, not only being a character that early on can do quite a bit of damage with the Crescent Bite, but also being a character that later on in the game, once you actually hit that 45 adventurer rank mark, can actually synergize really well with Shang Lee, and that is one of the reasons why she is so high up in the list. She has a lot of really good synergies with Shang Lee. She brings a lot of powerful abilities on freeze compositions, as she can become a very, very strong battery that can also give crit rate to a lot of the cryo characters that usually don't want to invest that heavily into because of the Blizzard Stray set. And with the addition of the Emblem of Severed Fates set, one of her biggest issues, which was energy regen, is now completely gone. All around, Rosaria is just a very strong character that's very hard to place anywhere other than S, mainly because of how free-to-play friendly she is. Crescent Pike early on, you can switch it over to Favonius Lance later once you're in the more energy-focused teams, and her damage at base is also really high. It's not as high as Shang Ling's, but it is comparable. I think at maximum rank, she ends up hitting something like, what was it, like 2,900 scaling on her burst, which is pretty damn good if you ask me. That is a bit with melt, but you can enable it. She's just a very strong unit all around. Her gap closing abilities are also pretty insane. Her energy generation is not small. A lot of her abilities are just good in general. Her constellations are also very powerful. And she pairs well with a lot of free-to-play characters, as well as the top-tier characters. So because of all of that, she ends up being very valuable. Not many weaknesses to say of, and just a character that brings a lot to the table. Definitely a good choice for S when it comes to characters. If you manage to get at least one Rosaria, by all means pair her with Shang Lee. You will see a lot of power in the future. If you're already trying to go for a freeze composition, Rosaria is definitely one of the characters you should keep an eye out for, as she is also one of the better applicators of the cryo element. Especially because it's off-field. I'm pretty sure that as it stands right now, Rosaria might actually be the only cryo character that's off-field, apart from Diona, and Diona is kind of unreliable in that department. Ganyu not S+? No, she is not S+, not for free-to-play. Not for free-to-play. Too expensive. Way too expensive. I've already mentioned a couple of the things, but just for a bit of a short one, she just doesn't pair that well with a lot of characters, and because she relies very heavily on 5-star weaponry, it can be really hard to get her out of that exponential threshold. It is not easy. If you don't have one of the 5-star weapons for her, it is very hard to get her to do a lot of damage. You can get her to do like 30,000 damage, that's relatively easy, but 30,000 damage every 2 seconds, there's a lot of characters that accomplish that, and there's a lot of characters that can accomplish that significantly easier. So, yeah, no. For free-to-play, Ganyu is not S+. She's definitely high, do not get me wrong, not S+. Female Kaya reskin with crit rate buff. Honestly, very accurate. Very, very accurate. One of the reasons why she stands a bit higher than Kaya is actually because of that crit rate buff. It is very strong. And her being a lance user also helps us quite a bit on the free-to-play department, as we do have a lot of very strong lances. Mainly the Catch and the Black Cliff Bow. Do not forget the Black Cliff Bow. That is, in my opinion, probably the best Black Cliff weapon. Geo characters are the easiest to build around. Yeah. One of the reasons for that is because a lot of them have different scaler than normal. Think about Shang Lee, he has HP scaling. Think about Albedo, he has defense scaling. Same for Noelle. The only character that has normal scaling, if you could call it that, is Ning Wang. And even she has a little bit of HP in there. Geo is just really easy to build because of the characters we have at the moment. And because the artifact sets are also very, very powerful. Archaic Petra, if it was any easier to use, you would probably see it everywhere. The only reason that it's not being seen right now, as much as it probably should, is just because it's annoying to proc. That is the only reason, because the buff is insanely strong. A lot of people think that Kazuha is very strong because of his elemental damage buff, and it's not even near what Archaic Petra can accomplish. So it's kind of a weird situation where the only reason you're not seeing more Archaic Petra is because people get too annoyed to take the extra second to grab the crystal. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm also in that camp because it is annoying. I forget very constantly. What alas. Enough about your characters. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? Ryden, probably one of the newer additions into, one of the newest additions into the game, and probably one of the better characters. She has definitely become one of my favorite characters ever since her release. She is not only incredibly fun to play, her design is also amazing, and I love her voice actress. Now, with those biases out of the way, let's go ahead and let's talk about what Ryden actually brings to the table. Couple things about Ryden. She is expensive. She is very, very expensive in a lot of ways that you would not imagine. Mainly on the artifact department. She has an easy time getting a weapon, that being the Catch. She has an easy time getting teams. Zhangling works incredibly well with her and is probably one of the best pairings in game. Same with Shincha, same with characters like Tartaglia, Tardy Glass, Tartaglia, Lover, Schneestein Queen. I'm not gonna continue. She has a really easy time getting almost everything except her artifacts. The only artifact set that the Ryden Shogun can use effectively is the Emblem of Severed Fates, which is not an easy set to get, because it requires you to get a lot of energy recharge, as well as a significant amount of crit rate in every single one of your artifacts. And seeing how difficult it is, this is a big issue. My Ryden, I have been working on her since before her release. I have been trying to get artifacts for her ever since I finished my Ayaka, which I finished somewhere around the start of the Yoi Mia banner. I have been trying to get Ryden artifacts for almost 2.5 months now. And just, I want to say like 4 days ago, I was finally able to use my Ryden to an effective degree. She is very, very expensive on the artifact department, but I will say that she's probably one of the best characters that are worth that amount of investment. Again, she works really well with a lot of the free play characters that are really beneficial. Her ability to pretty much nullify the need of energy recharge is very, very good, and the amount of damage that she can produce with her Musuno-ish state is significant. It is not a small amount. If you can manage to properly build a Ryden, she is likely to be one of your most flexible units, because not only does she fit well in anemo compositions, which are typically some of the better ones for free-to-play players, but she also fits really well in pretty much all the Vaporize compositions, which are, again, some of the more powerful options when it comes to not only free-to-play, but the game as a whole. Ryden has pretty much everything that she needs to succeed as a character if you can get the artifacts for her. They're not easy to get. I will say though, they are 100% worth it. Were it not for that particular thing, that getting perfect artifacts for Ryden is absolute hell, she would probably be S+. But she does have that weakness of being expensive on the resin department because of that artifact requirement. So I do have to lower her down a little bit to S. For good old Bulbasaur. But yeah, on the completely opposite side of the spectrum, we have Kokome. I don't think Kokome's bad. Flame me all you want, Kokome is a good-ass character. And this is the way that I'm going to prove it. I imagine that a lot of people here are free-to-play players. How many characters do you own that can deal 8,000 damage every 0.7 seconds without Bennett? I'll wait. I don't think many of you will get even a single one. I think there might be some Ayaka players out there that might be able to hit that amount of damage with her burst. Maybe some Zhangling players that can get that have gotten a lot of very powerful weaponry for her. There's not many characters that can actually accomplish this particular rate without the exponential increase that you're going to be getting from Constellations, without the exponential increase that you're going to be getting from Sucrose or Bennett, or without the exponential increase that you're going to be getting from 5-star weaponry. Kokome, plain and simple, she does not have a high ceiling. When it comes to characters in Genshin, she probably has one of the lowest ones. She cannot crit. That is the main reason why. She relies very, very heavily on elemental damage bonuses as well. But in terms of free-to-play power, she actually sits very high to the top because she's incredibly easy to build. I think in terms of characters, she's probably the easiest character to build in the entire game. I cannot think of a character that takes less amounts of effort than Kokome. And for the amount of damage that she's providing, she's honestly very, very impressive. One of my friends posed for Kokome in this particular banner, and it took her, I want to say, a week to get perfect artifacts for Kokome. A week. She's already doing more damage than her Ryden, which she has been working on for a very, very long time, and she has a 5-star weapon on it. So, for a free-to-play player, Kokome is easily one of the cheapest options that you can get that will continue to be useful. I know all the memes are going to be out there for, Barbara 2.0, less healing than Barbara. The thing that makes Kokome really, really good is the amount of damage that she can output within those 10 seconds. Within those 10 seconds, a regularly built Kokome on a free-to-play spectrum with a 4-star weapon, I'm using Prototype Amber, I consider that one to be the most effective weapon for her, just provides so much for a team. The Jellyfish by itself will hit for about 8,000 damage every tick, and every single one of her basic attacks will heal for about the same amount. Her basic attacks, they hit 6 times within a 3-second window. She has almost the exact same attack speed as Child, slightly lower. But because of that, she also has that amount of Hydra Replicator. She's the second best Hydra Replicator in the game. Tied with Child, surprisingly enough. But she brings a lot to the table. Pairs well with Zhangling, has healing on top of that, can use the Tenacity of the Middle Earth set, has a lot of damage on the base kit, can use Prototype Amber not only to be an energy battery, but also to be even more efficient when it comes to healing. She's just one hell of a character, and I'm not gonna lie, I spent pretty much everything that I had remaining from Ryden to try to get Kokome. I did not get her, but I'm probably gonna be trying to get her on the rerun. She is just an insane character for free-to-play. She brings so much to the table. It's difficult to pass up on her, especially now that healing is becoming to be a little bit more relevant. We're likely going to be seeing a lot of healing buffs in the future, whether it be from artifact sets or just more enemies with bleeds. Oh god, I hope not, but well, we're probably going to be seeing an even stronger version of the Rift Hound sometime in the future, so I wouldn't I would probably start working on some healers if you haven't already. When it comes to Kokome, well, she is very good, and a lot of the things that make her really good is that cheap factor. She has a very strong craft of weapon. Artifacts are not that big of an issue. She works well with pretty much every one of the free-to-play characters. There are a couple of things that are pretty annoying on her. The main thing is her burst. It does not have that long of a duration. It is very, very strong when it is active, but it does have its weaknesses. It does not remain when you switch out of it. I don't know why, but it doesn't. And it does have a fairly high energy cost, which is one of the reasons why I personally prefer to use a Prototype Amber, since that one at rank 3 can pretty much give your entire team 15 energy, and will solve a lot of the problems with Kokomi's energy generation. She is a bit hungry when it comes to energy, so it can be slightly difficult to enable her, as she does need a couple teammates that can provide her with that extra amount. You don't need that much, because since Kokome cannot crit, and she doesn't need crit in all honesty, you can invest a little bit more into energy recharge, and even just a small amount, like 130%, should be more than enough if you're using a Prototype Amber. Prototype Amber is probably a must, unless your Kokome has really, really powerful artifacts. I would probably stay with that weapon. If you manage to get enough energy recharge to the point where that's not that big of a deal, you can go ahead and use a weapon like the Trilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer to a very effective degree as well. Honestly, I just think Kokome is one hell of a character that's getting a lot of hate right now, not because the character's weak, but rather because a lot of the people driving this hate are typically whales who more or less, if a character does not one-shot everything in front of them in a single attack, they will consider trash. It happened to Yoi Mia, it happened to Ryden early on, it happens to Kokome, and it's likely to happen to every single character that we see going forward, because they're inevitably going to be compared with Ganyu, they're inevitably going to be compared with Futao, who are characters that, while incredibly strong, are very incredibly strong in a vacuum. They need a lot of things to go right for them in order to display the amount of power they're capable of. And when people are looking at YouTube videos, for example, they often just see the result. They don't see the hours that are spent artifact grinding, they don't see the hours that are spent crit fishing, they don't see the hours that are spent setting up the support characters to the point that you can one-shot everything in the game. There is a significant setup phase, especially when it comes to the price point it's being asked. A lot of the people that are using these particular characters, they're doing so with rank 5 weaponry, they're doing so with the maximum constellation characters. It is way too expensive. And because of that, characters that are very cheap, like Kokome, often get pushed down a bit more in a honestly kind of unfair manner. I do think that Kokome is easily one of the better free-to-play characters. Just incredibly tanky, very difficult to kill, and while she doesn't trivialize gameplay, she does make things like Spiral Abyss significantly easier. But yeah, that's kind of my point on Kokome. So let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? And the next character that we're going to be talking about is honestly another of those characters that I consider to be incredibly high value. Probably one of the better healers in the game, and that is Jean. Jean has been overlooked for a very, very long time, because early on in the game's history, we had a lot of characters that were taking the spotlight, mainly Diluc, and the other character from the standard banner that's taking that spotlight right now is currently Mona. I don't think Mona is stronger than Jean. I don't think Diluc is stronger than Jean. In my opinion, Jean is the best standard character, just because the makeup of her skills are really solid. She can not only do a very efficient job as what I'm going to be calling a paladin, essentially a very tanky healer that does a lot of damage while enabling characters like Baido and Shincha. That's basically what I'm calling a paladin. But she also has access to the Venereer set. And being able to give that heavy of a buff on a character this tanky that can do as much damage as Jean can is honestly very impressive. She has a lot of things go for her on the free-to-play department as well. Not only having access to weapons like the Iron Sting, which works incredibly well on Jean, but also being able to use other things like, oh god, I don't even remember that weapon. Whatever weapon gives you attack and defense plus physical damage bonus. Prototype Ranker, I believe that's the name. Anywho, Jean is just very, very strong overall. Access to Venereer, access to healing, access to a lot of tankiness, access to DPS potential, access to a lot of energy in the form of her elemental skill, which gives the highest amount of energy apart from Bennett. Jean is a masterpiece of a character. Definitely one of the strongest ones. Incredibly flexible. She can be a support if you need her to. She can be a DPS if you need her to. She can be a burst damage dealer if you need her to. Incredibly powerful character. Very few weaknesses. Very, very glad if you can get her. On a similar department, we have another character that is currently seen as very, very strong, and for a lot of the similar reasons that Jean has. Jean's CC is on the lower end of the anime characters. Kazuha's is on the middle end, but his damage is definitely on a higher portion. One of the reasons why Kazuha sees so much play at the moment is because his abilities are not only very fluid, but they also deal significant amount of damage. That is currently the thing that makes Kazuha shine over other options. If you can manage to get the hybrid version of Kazuha running, his damage is very high. That is not easy to accomplish, however, as it often needs things like Summon's Constellations as well as 5-star weaponry. One of the more common ways that a lot of people take a lot of advantage of Kazuha is by being able to double proc his E, which, if I remember correctly, requires you to have Constellations. He is probably one of the more expensive ones on this list. I would say that he's right up there with Ryden. He requires a full set of Venereer that has a significant amount of crit rate, that has a significant amount of energy recharge, that also has elemental mastery, that can, as well as a way of getting extra attack power, because otherwise he doesn't do that much. Thankfully, Bennett exists, and one of the things you will see is that Kazuha is often paired with Bennett because of this reason, because he needs so many stats at such a high degree. He is probably the most expensive anime character. Is he worth the effort? I'ma be real, probably not. I do think that if you're on the free-to-play department and you need what Kazuha brings, I would probably go for Sucrose instead. The one advantage that Kazuha does have over Sucrose is that he is more fluid. He has a lot more mobility, and his CC is slightly stronger in very specific scenarios. So, at the end of the day, it's probably going to come out on which character you prefer the most, since they're both so similar in terms of both investment and efficiency. They're almost interchangeable, in all honesty. Whichever one you like the most is probably going to be the one that you're going to go for. Sucrose is least expensive, since Kazuha does rely a lot on the C2. I do think he's kind of a trap character that works best in whale builds. This does not mean that he's weak, because there are weapons that work well with him on the free-to-play spectrum. It's just the amount of investment that he requires is a bit too high for what he's actually bringing. At the end of the day, when we take a look at free-to-play Kazuha, he's more than likely just going to be bringing a little bit of DPS, somewhere around 9k total DPS total. The Venereer set, and probably around 25% extra damage to one element. That's what Kazuha represents, and that's something that other characters can accomplish significantly cheaper. Not a bad character though. He's still incredibly strong. He's just way too expensive for my liking. If you can get him to that point, he's definitely an S plus character. It's just, God, is he expensive. And he's expensive in a way that you normally wouldn't imagine. He works in pretty much every single team comp though, so that is definitely a big plus for him. His biggest negative, for me at the very least, is just how ridiculous his artifacts are to get. It's not easy. Not easy in the slightest. Alright, let's go ahead and let's move over to the A+ list, shall we? Just give me one sec. Characters with skill of non-metastats like defense, HP, energy recharge, element of mastery, blah blah blah, all of those. They are actually very required, yes, because the way that the artifact system in Genshin works is very, very restrictive. HP percentage, you will get an HP percentage artifact like 30% of the time. That is just how it is. You will get defense artifacts 30% of the time. That's just how the nature of Genshin is. So having characters that can take advantage of those is really helpful in that department. Although the percentage of characters that need HP percent or defense percentage in comparison to the ones that need crit rate and attack are way too high. There's only a single character in the game that can do without crit rate and crit damage, and that's Kokome. There's like 3 characters that scale off HP, out of which only 2 have reasonable amounts of DPS. There's like, what is it, like 3 characters that have defense percentage as some of their scalings, one of which is Xinyan, who has defense percentage as the shield scaling, which is really horrible because Xinyan is 100% meant to be a DPS burst character. The other 2 are really good, that being Noelle and Albedo. It's kind of weird because there's a lot of characters that are really, really good when it comes to the separate scalings, but if the character doesn't lean heavily into it, it can end up being a disaster, like what we see with Xinyan. Xinyan's shield, because of the defense scaling, is basically useless, because Xinyan is an incredibly offensive character that requires just pure crit damage. She cannot afford to invest into defense in the slightest. She requires like 300% crit damage in order to be efficient, and because of that, she is very, very resource intensive. One of the reasons why she is actually in B in this category. But we'll get to that in a bit. For now, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, which are going to be the A+ characters, and we're going to be talking about Kaeya. Kaeya. Everything that's true for Rosaria is true for Kaeya. The only thing and the only reason why Kaeya is a bit lower is because it can actually be fairly difficult to get Kaeya set up properly. He is one of the free players. He's one of the free characters that you get. That's really, really good. He generates a lot of energy. Again, really, really good. His burst is very powerful. The one thing about him is that getting his constellations is kinda difficult. You can get them from the shop, but that is a lot of resources you have to invest into it. So it can be very difficult to get him to the maximum point where he is super, super amazing. Other than that, he is probably at the top of A+. And if we ever get some form of free-to-play weapon other than the Kageuchi, that works well with Kaeya, he'll probably go to S. I think out of all the free-to-play out of the starter characters that you end up getting, Kaeya is 100% the best one. He works really well in physical damage builds, incredible battery, a lot of damage on the burst as well. Rosaria is a bit higher, and Rosaria has a crit rate buff, hence why Rosaria is higher. But Kaeya is not far behind, and if he were to ever get some form of buff, he would probably be higher on the list. If you manage to get Kaeya to, I believe it was C4, he's probably yes. Trip Lord. Good point. He's the best of the starting characters. Zero doubt. If you're starting out the game, pick up Kaeya, use him until you get Zhangling. Just does a lot, both on the support department and on the DPS department. He's probably one of the better physical DPS characters as well. I think there's very few characters that beat him on that department. It's also fairly helpful that he has a teleport. It used to be annoying and one of the worst parts of the kit, but now that enemies move around as much as they do, it ends up being very, very useful. Not really much to say about him, really. He's pretty much just Rosaria without the crit rate buff. Just really, really strong. So let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. Another very, very strong character that's unfortunately set back by her element, as well as the lack of impactful weaponry. Baido. Baido is probably one of the best supports in the game. She is very expensive though. Because she is a electro character, there's not that many ways of increasing her damage, which is not really that important for her because her burst is probably one of the strongest bursts that we have in the game. It is, if you manage to get her at C2, one of the highest scaling bursts available when you're fighting multiple enemies. Because it chains between each enemy, and it can chain between two enemies at once. So if you're fighting two enemies, it'll chain to both of those enemies, and then both of those enemies will ping pong between each other, effectively almost instant killing them. In a very similar fashion to Shincha, if you can enable a 100% proc rate of Baido's Stormbreaker, you will get one of the highest scaling abilities in the game. If you're fighting multiple enemies, that scaling goes completely off the charts. She is one of the stronger characters who is only being held back by how expensive she is. She does require constellations to be efficient, mainly the C2, but she does bring a lot if you can manage to get to that point. She has a shield, damage mitigations, one of the few characters with damage mitigations in the game, and very, very strong damage potential. Hard to build. She requires a lot of energy recharge, and Most Severed Fates is probably her best set at the moment, which is not really that big of a positive because of how difficult it is to get a good Emblem of Severed Fates artifact set. You need a lot of energy recharge, you need a lot of crit rate, you need a lot of crit damage, you need a lot of attack percentage. It is not easy to build. If you manage to get it though, really, really strong. One of her best pairings is with Bennett because her burst snapshots as well. She's a very, very strong support, and if you do manage to get her to that point where she's very strong, Tidecaller is also very powerful. If you can manage to get a perfect counter, that hurts. It hurts a lot. It's not a small amount of damage. It is comparable to some characters' burst. So keep that in mind when you're playing Baido. The full counter mechanic is definitely one of the things that will separate bad Baido players from good Baido players. If you manage to get a full counter, you get 4 energy particles, which with a little bit of energy recharge will go a long way in feeding her massive energy cost. They did do Baido very dirty by not allowing her burst to proc with Ryden's elemental skill, or elemental burst. It is probably one of the most frustrating things that MiHoYo has done in recent memory, and I do hope that it gets fixed at some point or another, but MiHoYo are very, very stubborn about it. We might get the fix at some point or another. Who knows? It's going to depend very heavily on how much we can pressure MiHoYo into it. So we'll have to wait and see. The good thing about Baido is that even without that particular setup, she works really well on a lot of teams. One of the most free-to-play friendly teams out there includes Baido as one of the characters. And that team is Pure Electro with Sucrose and Shincha. It is entirely comprised out of 4-star characters, most of which you can build at a decent amount of at a decent rate without having to worry too much about it. The double mitigations with him and Shincha, with her and Shincha, make pretty much every single character incredibly tanky. She's just an amazing character overall. Definitely a top priority pick, especially if you don't have a lot of 5-star characters that can replace her. Mainly Ryden. Ryden is usually the character that tends to replace Baido in a lot of teams. Were it not for the unfortunate buff scenario, the character that would end up getting replaced is the next character that we're going to be talking about, Fischl. A lot of the things that are true for Baido are true for Fischl, however, she is not as expensive to build as Baido is. There's a lot of characters that usually require constellations. Fischl's not really one of them. She is just very, very strong as it is. If you do manage to get to C6, she becomes easily one of the best supports in the game, especially if you're running a lot of multi-attacking characters that can proc the Everlasting Raven multiple times. she essentially becomes a crescent pike for every single character in the game. If you can enable a good Fischl, she is insane. Not as insane as Baido, but still very, very close. Especially if you're using her in electro charge compositions. One of the overlooked abilities that Fischl has is that every time that an electro reaction is triggered while Oz is out on the field, she will do damage in an AoE where that reaction triggered. And this reaction can trigger with everything. If you trigger Electro Swirl, it happens. If you trigger Electro Charge, it happens. If you trigger Crystallize, it happens. This is a very significant amount of damage, and it is not something to overlook. Fischl can do a lot of scaling damage, not only with the addition of Oz, not only with her passive, not only with the C6. Fischl by herself is just very, very strong, and probably one of the best off-field damage characters that we have at the moment. Especially because if you properly invest into energy recharge, which it doesn't need that much to begin with, you can get a lot of benefit from Midnight Phantasmagoria in order to keep Oz pretty much 100% of the time. Takes a little bit of while to get used to it, but if you do manage to get it to that point, very, very strong character. Definitely would recommend. Has been seeing a lot less favor, mainly because we have been getting a lot of electro characters that are very strong. Ryden in particular comes to mind. In a couple of teams, you see her being replaced with other characters like Baido. It really does depend on the way that you want to put her in. As far as electro supports go, she's probably the best one. Baido becomes better when her constellations are up, but it's difficult to pass out on Fischl. She's very, very strong. Amy, time for a dinner. Time for a dinner. Alright. Let's go ahead and let's move over to our next character, shall we? Eula! Probably the darling for a lot of speedrunners. Eula is incredibly strong in the whale department, but she is one of the characters that does translate really well. Sorry. She's one of the characters that does translate really, really well into free-to-play. While Eula is often seen as a more whale-heavy team because she relies a lot on the one-shot mechanics, because she relies a lot on characters like Bennett, she actually does work really well on the free-to-play aspect as well. It's just her playstyle is different. In the free-to-play player's hand, she is not the I will one-shot everything in your path. She's more of a consistent damage dealer that goes around gathering as much energy as possible and trying to maximize the burst damage periods. Because of this, she can be fairly difficult to play at times, mainly because she does rely on characters like Bennett. She does need an electro character that can accomplish a lot of different roles with her, and she does need a bit of support from Superconduct, as well as whatever physical damage boosting abilities you can manage to find. Usually you will see her paired with characters like Lisa or Xinyan to a lesser degree. One of her biggest issues has always been energy recharge. If you can manage to solve the energy issue that she tends to have, Eula will be a very strong character. The easiest way to do this is if you have Ryden. Ryden will typically be able to fix a lot of the issues by herself. Not all of them though. Eula, very, very strong, relatively easy to build. You can get a free-to-play character. You can get a free-to-play weapon in the Snow Tomb Star Silver. There it is. The Snow Tomb Star Silver is a very strong weapon for Eula, and there's a lot of characters that can take advantage of that. Of the things that Eula brings, mainly Xinyan. Very combo heavy, a little bit annoying to use at times. If she doesn't crit on her burst, you might as well reset. But very strong nonetheless. She can be used to a very efficient degree. Kind of difficult to do so, but very powerful. She is slightly tankier than other DPS characters. Don't rely too much on that. You will still get one-shot by a lot of abilities. Even though she has defense increase, it doesn't really amount to much in Eula's case because you're building her pure damage. Probably one of the most viable physical characters at the moment. That is 100% for sure, yes. Um, Not much else to say about Eula. She is one of those characters that has a very exponential nature, but that nature is often locked behind C6 as well as her personal weapon. If you can't accomplish it, she does become a fairly powerful physical DPS nuker, especially if you pair her with a C6 Shinyan. Not even C6, I think it's C4, the one that actually works. C4 Shinyan plus C0 Eula is definitely what I would try to go for. Energy recharge is difficult to fix. If you manage to do that, whether it be with a character like Rosaria with Favonius Lance, I believe that is one of the better ways of doing it. You can manage to use her properly. She is going to require a lot of energy. If you're using her with Bennett, you might have to equip the Favonius sword on Bennett. Heck, even sacrificial might be necessary depending on how it goes. Very, very energy hungry. If you can manage it though, very strong. Kinda hard to place her higher though, because of all the weaknesses that she has. With the way that a lot of enemies have been going around, characters like Eula have actually started to lose a lot of favor. Enemies are very, very mobile, they have a lot of dodge mechanics, and Eula can be very difficult to hit with her burst sometimes. The AoE, while good, is not incredibly massive, and the massive delay on the ability does make it hard to work. If we had done this tier list before Inazuma released, Eula would probably be one tier higher. But as it stands right now, she is very solidly into A+, and depending on the enemies that we get in the future, she might actually even go lower. The way that Genshin has been evolving is not conducive to Claymore users. A lot of the things that you will notice around here is that Claymore users are a lot lower than they should be because of the way that enemies have been kind of evolving, really. Mobility has gone way, way up. Dodge mechanics have gone up even further. And what once used to be very strong characters that were able to deal consistent damage in a true DPS fashion are no longer seen as that valuable because of the increase in immunity frames as well. There's a lot of characters that just dodge around too much. There's a lot of characters that you just can't hit anymore. And this naturally reduces the value of characters that rely on big hits like that. They take a very long time to charge up. It's not that easy. We are seeing a increasing switch into characters that can do a significant amount of damage within short bursts of time. That is what Genshin has been starting to move towards, because of the increase in immunity frames, because of the increase in dodge mechanics, because of the increase in mobility all around. I'm pretty sure that I said this earlier, but if we count the amount of characters that have immunity frames, a dodge mechanic, or that can travel half the map in half a second, the number's already like over 15. It's kind of difficult for a lot of characters like Eula to keep on doing what they do with this many enemies that, yes, you have the power to kill everything in one hit. Yes, you have the power to kill everything within 10 seconds if you can hit them constantly. The question now becomes, how do you hit them that much? How do you manage to get to that point? A lot of the shifts that we're seeing tend to go to either characters that can do a significant amount of damage within a fraction of a second, or characters that can keep an enemy locked down in place for long periods of time, such as freeze compositions with Ayaka, freeze compositions with Ganyu. That's kind of the things that we're leaning towards now the most, which does hurt characters like Eula quite a bit. The only exception that we have to this particular rule is the AoE characters we have seen, and the AoE teams that take advantage of really high value characters like Baido and Shincha. That's pretty much the only exception to this particular rule, because their damage is so damn high that even if you drop a couple of ticks, it's not that big of a deal. Even if the enemy dodges a couple of ticks, you're not losing that much. Losing one tick on Baido burst, losing one tick on Xingqiu burst does not feel as bad as losing 3 to 4 basics on Eula, losing 3 to 4 basics on Diluc. It's honestly, it just tanks their DPS. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing characters that used to be incredibly good, significantly lower on the tier list. But we'll get to those in the future. That's it for Eula. A character that's adapting really well into the meta, we have Futao. Had we done this list earlier, Futao would probably be lower on this list, because free-to-play Futao is just way too risky. She does not work well with a lot of characters in the game. She's very special when it comes to what she wants to team up with, and the way that her damage works. While you can get really high damage with a free-to-play Futao, it is very limiting. It is not easy to do so. She works in a similar manner to Kokomi, where a lot of her abilities center around HP. However, she requires a lot more crit than Kokomi does, and a lot of her top-end potential is very much locked behind specific weaponry and specific constellations. C1 is very big for her. C6 is insane. The rank 5 Staff of Homa increases her power almost double. She is probably the highest exponential scaling character in the game right now. A free-to-play player is never going to get to that degree. You can simulate a lot of it, you can get a lot of benefits from it. It's very, very expensive. For a free-to-play player, Futao will likely work in a similar way to Eula. She is probably going to be able to use a couple of her charge attacks within a small amount of time, not vaporize every single hit, not take full advantage of the elemental skill. You're probably going to be doing like 1 or 2 charge attacks, setting up for a big burst, and then switching over to a different character to give the 12% crit rate that she has to the rest of the team. In a free-to-play hand, Futao is not a hyper carry. She is a gap filler burst support. And I know that's weird, but that is kind of the case. There are very few exceptions to this, and usually those exceptions require you to have a very strong team consisting of Shincha, Shang Lee, and Albedo. If you do not have exactly this team, free-to-play Futao is not that great. She's good, do not get me wrong. She can get to a lot of damage really quickly, melt setups are very powerful, and you can get a lot of stuff from it. But her downtime is just too long. Her downtime is very difficult to deal with. It is awkward to build around her without these specific characters. And when it comes to the way that you increase the damage of Futao, it is incredibly limiting. She has a hard cap for a free-to-play player, and that hard cap is not easy to get past. Staff of Homa is almost a must on Futao if you want to use her as a hyper carry. If you do not have that Staff of Homa, it is very difficult to replace that, as the only real way of doing that is with team synergy, which tends to be very expensive. She's probably one of the more expensive characters that we have in the game. She does have a big payoff. I would not recommend her to a lot of people. It is just too much. Too much money. Too much effort. Difficult to recommend. But nonetheless, if you do manage to get her, if you are excited to use her, you can still use her to a decent degree. On the weaponry department, while there is a hard cap, this does actually make her able to use a 3-star weapon without much worry, because she doesn't need that much attack percentage. She wants HP instead. So a weapon like the White Tassel can often be really powerful for her. A weapon like the Dragon's Bane, which some people might be able to get, can also be very efficient if you do manage to pair her with Shincha. One of the biggest problems that you will have with free-to-play Futao is going to be survivability. She is a character that wants to be very low on HP at all times, and she is very, very squishy. If you do not manage to get a good shielder for her, you will struggle. Very, very specific character that if you manage to properly set up, will carry you through a lot, but that properly setting up will cost you a lot of resources. So if you want power without having to worry too much about it, there are probably better options out there. Even something like Kokome, something like Ryden if she ever comes back, something like Yoi Mia will be a better choice than Futao if you're on the free-to-play spectrum and you don't plan to spend heavily on the Staff of Homa or her constellations. Again, pretty good. pretty good character that's actually really good in the meta as the things keep on evolving, as we are likely going to be seeing a higher need for burst characters. Futao fits really well into that regard, and I do expect that even on the free-to-play spectrum, she might keep on going up. The second that we get a character that can properly enable Futao to melt rather than vaporize, she's probably going to shoot up at least 1 or 2 ranks, even on the free-to-play spectrum. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, because she's already so strong as she is. But we'll just have to wait and see. Let's see. So, at everyone, someone who doesn't have Hydra DPS and Pyro DPS, so what should they choose? Next patch is best DPS banner, so any opinion? Oh boy, that one's difficult, because both of the characters we're getting are pretty strong. I would say that if you're just starting out, and you don't have the resources to enable Futao, go for Tardiglass. Tartaglia. Lover of the Dying Queen. God damn it, I'm not doing that meme again. I'm not gonna lie, I might actually do a video on that. Like actually singing that song. No promises. No promises. We might do that for a 1,000 subscriber special. I don't know. But yeah, when it comes to that, if you cannot enable Futao, I would go for Tartaglia. If you can enable Futao, then go for Futao. But if I'm being honest, when it comes to Pyro DPSs, you're probably better off just investing into Zhangling and then not going for a Pyro DPS, but going for a Cryo instead, since that will likely be more beneficial to you in the future. A character like Ayaka, you're probably not going to be able to get, but Ganyu is supposed to be around the corner, so that might be the better option. Rather than trying to invest into a Pyro DPS, it might be better to just invest into a Cryo DPS and use Zhangling for the places where you do need the Pyro. You don't need that much Pyro anymore, which is thankfully a good thing. That's probably what I would do. If you're just starting out, you don't have many resources, but you can at least guarantee 1 5-star, I would probably go for Tartaglia, and I would save up for the Ganyu rerun. That is what I would recommend the most for anybody just right now. Futao is way too specific a character. I don't think I can recommend her to a person just starting out. They will struggle pretty heavily, especially with the survivability department. Futao needs her shields. She needs the shield. It's not super easy to survive without it, especially nowadays when we have so many outside damage sources that you just can't avoid. Being good at dodging is becoming less and less important now, as healing and shields are seemingly going to become the new meta, just because of how much stuff you have to deal with when you're fighting an Abyss. Just take a look at Abyss Floor 11. There are, what was it, like 9 different sources of damage that you have to deal with, of which 3 are completely unavoidable. It's a complete disaster. God, is Abyss. Abyss needs to change. Badly. But yeah, that's kind of it for Futao. Very strong character. For a free-to-play, mostly as a burst support. Weirdly enough, not really a burst support, more like a burst sub-DPS, if you can categorize her as much. Whatever category Tartaglia and Ryden fit into, that's where that's where Futao fits into. It's just she is more based on offense rather than support. Her main support is mostly on snapshotting crit, which is very efficient. Snapshotting crit is not a bad thing to do, and it is something that a character like Albedo really, really likes. Alright, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? We're going to be talking about one of my most hated characters, a character that I absolutely despise the most. Venti. Tenanda yo this bit. Almost said it. Tenanda. I'm not even going to bother with this. I hate this character. I absolutely despise Venti. But, let me get that bias out of the way, and let's talk about the things that make Venti good and the things that don't make him as good. Starting out with things. I think Venti is incredibly overrated. He is very, very strong. His burst is definitely one of the strongest bursts in the game. But the way that his burst works is centered exclusively on CC. And we are getting an increasing amount of enemies that are completely immune to Venti's CC. So this makes it an option in which, when Venti is good, is when his burst works on enemies, when they can be pulled together and when they can be CC'd with Venti's burst. When Venti is bad, is it literally every other scenario. If Venti's burst is not pulling enemies, Venti feels completely and utterly useless. And his design as one of the early characters is starting to show. A lot of his animations are very slow. A lot of his animations don't work that well. His cooldowns are fairly high. And while the burst has remained relevant, with the amount of enemies that we're getting that are just becoming completely immune to it, it's very difficult to put Venti in the category where he used to be. When the game first started, there were very few enemies who were capable of resisting Venti's burst. That is no longer the case. We now have multiple common enemies that don't care about Venti. And because of this, his CC is seen as significantly less valuable. And because the only thing that Venti brings is that CC, it is kind of hard to put him any higher than where he is right now. His CC is, without a doubt, the strongest in the game. Plain and simple. But there are other characters that can accomplish a comparable amount of CC that also bring more to the table. I'm talking about Sucrose, I'm talking about Kazuha, I'm talking about Jean. They can bring a reasonably comparable amount of CC, maybe not in the case of Jean, without the downside that Venti has. He also has energy generation, which is very strong. However, one of the issues that I keep on finding with Venti is that his elemental absorption is weird. And that's really bad for him because the elemental absorption is a very significant part of his damage. And I don't know when this happened, but I have found it incredibly harder to have him absorb elements. I don't know why, because it should happen whenever you trigger Swirl, but for some reason, even though he's triggering Swirl, he's not absorbing the element. And I don't know when this started happening, but this started happening recently. And until this bug gets fixed, it is affecting Venti quite a lot. I imagine that it might have happened when they changed a couple of the things with EM recently. It's been weird. There are often times where I cannot get the element absorption to trigger for like half of the burst, and that is very, very annoying. As far as it goes though, Venti's still Venti. He brings a lot to the table. It's just those moments when he doesn't bring it to the table, when the CC is not relevant, I keep on repeating to myself, God, I wish this was any other character. He's still Venti though, so he still does his thing. Venerier, energy, CC. That's what Venti brings. If that's what you want, go for him. I would probably recommend Sucrose over Venti at this point in time though. She's just more flexible, less frustrating, and easier to work with. I also hate the way that his targeting works. He always targets the absolutely wrong thing. But alas, that's just me not using him properly, I guess. Despite that, he still remains very strong because of just how efficient he is. When he works, he feels unbeatable. When he doesn't work, he feels like trash. He's very 50-50 in that regard. But when you can use him, you do feel how powerful he is. So that's Venti. Fanboy. Yep, he is the #1 fanboy, isn't he? I don't know, I'd still give it to Shincha. I feel he's more reliable. But let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. I'm pretty sure she is the newest addition to the game in terms of 4-star characters. That position is soon to go for Toma, but for now, Sayu. Sayu is honestly just such a good character. everything that I said that was true for Jean is true for Sayu, except the physical department. Sayu cannot be as efficient as a physical department on the physical department as Jean can be, and her CC is more or less non-existent. But the amount of healing that she can provide, how easily she can trigger Venereer, how powerful a lot of her souls are, and the increased mobility that she brings, makes her a very valuable character. I do think that she is definitely one of the better healers that we have right now, because of that increased mobility that she has. Mobility is one of the things that has become more and more important in Genshin, and being able to gap close to the teleporting enemies that keep on moving around everywhere makes Sayu very good. She's able to quickly close down those distances, which will increase your overall DPS because you don't have to spend as much time walking towards the enemy, taking damage in the way, and trying to fight your way through it. She can just rush around everything. She is knockback immune while she's in the thing. She heals when she triggers Swirl. Just a really, really good character. I honestly want to place her higher, but I just can't. She brings a lot to the table, but what she brings is kind of difficult to quantify, and it most certainly isn't as much as the characters in S. A+ is definitely where Sayu belongs. Very strong, adorable, very fun to play. Tons of healing, tons of DM, a lot of extra power with the Venereer set. Definitely one of the better anemo characters that we have gotten so far. But that about does it for the characters in A+. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the characters in regular A. And these are kind of like the characters that are centering at the base of balance. These are kind of like the characters that are the most balanced at the moment, which is kind of weird, because the first character that we're going to be talking about is Klee. One of the characters that, at the beginning of the game, was widely considered to be the strongest one that we had available. That is no longer the case. Not because her damage has gone down. Her damage is still significantly high. It's just so much more difficult to actually connect with Klee that her value has been dropping quite a bit. A lot of the enemies that we have to fight right now are enemies that just completely and utterly destroy Klee. Trying to fight the samurai from Inazuma with Klee and without Shang Lee is an absolute nightmare. She is too small, she gets staggered by everything, and all of her abilities are incredibly slow. Her elemental skill locks her in place, her charge attacks lock her in place, they're also slow to actually trigger, so a lot of the time you will find that the enemy that you're trying to hit with a charge attack, even if you manage to cancel properly, just jumps back and doesn't take any damage, or dashes away from it. Or in the case of the floating enemies, don't get hit by it. The new enemies that have been released have made Klee so much more difficult to play. It's very difficult to recommend her in a lot of cases. She often relies on Shang Lee for survivability. If you don't have Shang Lee, Klee feels like an entirely different character. It is night and day. So without Shang Lee, she's very hard to recommend. Still strong, still powerful, but the enemies that she has to fight don't allow her to show that power. The one thing that keeps Klee out of B+, or the B rating for that matter, is that her burst has actually scaled relatively well in this new environment, where the auto-tracking has been quite significant for a lot of enemies that are very difficult to deal with, mainly the floaters that were added in Inazuma, as well as a lot of the enemies that dodge. Her burst is very strong in that regard as well, it's just not as strong as other characters, because it can't vaporize that quickly. She's becoming very similar to Yoi Mia in that regard, where more often than not, a lot of the ways that Klee has become, she used to be this really powerful AoE monster. Now she's drifting more towards single target, which is where she's starting to suffer quite a bit. Kind of hard to recommend to roll for Klee, in all honesty. If you're rolling for a 5-star, I would probably roll for something else. They wanted to buff Electra, but accidentally buffed all Anemo units. Pretty much. The buffs that we received at 1.6 made every single Anemo unit incredibly powerful. The only one that can't really benefit from it that much was the Anemo Traveler, and even the Anemo Traveler can do quite a bit of damage with the new buffs. It's just, why would you want to use the Anemo Traveler over literally every other option? If he's your only Anemo character, which was the case for me for a very, very long time, I absolutely pity you, and I would try my best to get any other unit as quickly as possible. Aren't they all good? They're all good to a certain degree. Except for the Traveler. The Traveler is... the Anemo Traveler is so bad. They trigger Venereer, I guess. They have a high store rate. Just don't use the Anemo Traveler. Just don't use the Anemo Traveler. Alright. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? The next character that we have on the list is one of my personal favorites, Noelle. Noelle has been getting better and better as the game has been progressing. Further and further. God, I'm getting tired. Apologies. As the game has been progressing further and further, Noelle has actually been getting better and better. She has been getting a lot of characters that support her really well, mainly in the form of Albedo. She has been getting a lot of really nice benefits with the buffs to Geo, as well as the increased mobility that enemies have usually don't matter for her. She is incredibly tanky, so a lot of the extra damage doesn't really matter either. Stagger resistance on the breastplate means that the extra annoyance a lot of enemies bring to the table doesn't really affect her that much, and her humongous range while sweeping time is active means that mobility becomes less and less relevant for her. As shields have been getting buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed even further, she keeps on getting better and better and better overall. Noelle is very, very strong. She is definitely one of the hallmarks of what a defensive DPS looks like, and she's definitely one of the queens of AoE at the moment. Her damage is absolutely ridiculous if you can enable it, and she can do a lot of carrying really early on. For a free-to-play player, she's also a character that you get early on, and that you can invest fairly heavily into without worry of that going to waste. If you manage to get a Gladiator set for her, she will probably carry you through a lot of the early floors of Abyss. And against bosses, she is my go-to this day. She's probably the character that I use the most when I'm fighting weekly bosses, just because of how little she cares about them. No matter the amount of damage that you bring against Noelle, she will always remain standing, no matter what you're fighting. If you pair her with characters like Baido, if you pair her with characters like Shincha as well, her damage mitigations make her completely unkillable. Absolutely outstanding character. That's unfortunately just a little bit too expensive to recommend to everybody. When it comes to early on, you're probably going to be choosing either Shang Lee or Noelle as the characters you're going to be investing into. Sometimes both. I often recommend both. So she is probably going to be one of those characters that you're going to be getting a lot. The increase in necessity for healing that Mihoyo seems to be pushing for does give her a little bit of extra benefits, as the new enemies seem to provide. Even if they ignore her shield, her healing is still very, very strong. And the fact that she has complete and utter stagger immunity with breastplate makes her really powerful. Another often overlooked thing about Noelle, and one of the reasons why, despite being a great sword user that relies on normal attacks, has not affected her that much, has been that her stagger rate is among the highest in the game. If you constantly attack a enemy with Noelle, the stagger rate of her sweeping time combined with the stagger rate of her normal attacks means that you can keep enemies staggered for a very, very long time. If you manage to time it properly and you manage to dash out at the proper rate, you can keep enemies stunned without them being able to do anything for a significant period of time. The only time where they will dodge away will likely be when you're recasting sweeping time. That is the only time where enemies can actually move if you manage to stagger them with Noelle. Very, very strong. Very, very powerful. Kind of difficult to set up because she relies a lot on sweeping time, so you need a lot of energy recharge. Oftentimes, the best way of doing that for a free-to-play is with the Geo Traveler, which is kind of awkward, but it does end up working pretty well. The more reliable way is with Albedo, or Shang Lee for that department. If you manage to get a complete Geo core, Noelle will definitely be one of the best characters that you can invest into. But because of how expensive that tends to be, it is kind of difficult to say go for Noelle in every case. She's more of a character that you can go heavily into if you manage to get the proper resources. That energy recharge is not easy to sustain, but if you can do it, it's unlikely you're going to die against most of anything, and her damage can scale really, really high to the point where she can be one of the better DPS characters in the game. That will require you to get to C6, which is not the easiest thing to accomplish. I have been aiming for C6 Noelle for the longest time, and I have not been able to get her past C4. I'm still trying to get that Thanos power gauntlet of the constellations. Slow and steady progression. Yeah, I can definitely see this. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. Xiao! He's a Nemo character only in name and in the fact that he's a Nemo. If I'm being honest with you, Xiao is the least a Nemo character that the Nemo character list has. A lot of what Xiao does tends to be centered on his plunge attack, and he doesn't really take advantage of a lot of the Nemo elements' abilities. Swirl rates on Xiao are okay, but you're not really going to be using a Venereer Xiao now, are you? You're more than likely going to be trying to set up as much damage potential as possible with his plunge attacks, which kind of means that Xiao is meant to be played as a hyper carry, which tends to actually be fairly bad for him. Because of this, the amount of teammates that he can properly take advantage of are not that high. Some of the better ones that you can actually use as a free-to-play tend to be 5-star characters. I'm thinking Albedo and Ryden in particular. It can be fairly difficult to get good characters that synergize with Xiao, as there are very few ways of actually increasing his damage. The only real ways that you're going to be doing that is through the use of things like elemental damage bonuses, which there really aren't that many. One of the more common ways that you see nowadays is with the use of the Hakushin ring and another character like Sucrose plus Ryden, and even that is just a very small amount. There's not that many ways as a free-to-play to increase the damage that Xiao has, but his damage can go fairly high. And even with weapons just like the Blackcliff Pole, you can get a lot of benefit from Xiao. Not a bad character to go for, but he does have a lot of weaknesses, which is why he is an A. His energy recharge is difficult to accomplish. More often than not, you need a very strong battery, Sucrose tending to be that battery, although you often see characters like Sayu now taking that role. If you manage to get Jean, Jean is also a pretty good character. The one thing that Xiao really, really lacks at the moment is easy access to damage boosting capabilities. There are currently no artifact sets that increase the damage of plunge attacks, hence why most of his artifact sets that you see on him are either full Venereer, depending on if your team requires something like that. Usually that tends to go to the second Anemo character, or something like 2 Venereer and then 2 of whatever damage boosting thing you can get. Usually things like Gladiators or Shimenawas take that role. That's kind of the way that Xiao has ended up. And the good thing for Xiao is that despite the increased mobility of enemies, his elemental skill follows those enemies, so it's not that big of a deal for him. The increased power in his jump capacity and his massive AoE have also netted him a pretty decent spot when it comes to certain teams. His biggest weakness at the moment is that his DPS can be kind of unreliable in certain cases. So it can be fairly difficult to get a high amount of DPS with Xiao. Still very strong, especially in AoE setups. He struggles a bit against bosses, however. Bosses at the moment are some of his most difficult fights. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. Diona. Diona has always been a really good character, and a lot of things that make Diona good are still pretty much the exact same. Her shield is, I'm pretty sure, the third strongest in the game, and you can get her to do quite a significant amount of healing as well with her burst. She also has an elemental damage buff at C6, which is not really that accessible for a lot of free-to-play players, but it is there, and it is something to mention. The main thing that makes Diona really good is that she can be one of the better cryo batteries in the game if you manage to get the sacrificial bow. I'm pretty sure that's the one. So if you manage to get that, she can become an incredibly powerful battery that brings healing to the table, as well as a very, very strong shield. As a car unit, she also has access to the elemental cryo resonance, which gives 15% extra crit if you manage to apply cryo. She also has a decent amount of cryo application with her burst, not as strong as Rosaria, but is still there, so you can take advantage of it. I do feel like Rosaria is slightly better in that regard, as she is more offensive, but the support potential of Diona cannot be understated. She will usually be the second battery for characters like Ayaka, and even Ganyu to a certain degree, depending on the way that you team up. Overall, just a very strong character, very few weaknesses overall, but her ceiling is fairly limited, as what she does can be accomplished by other units, and doesn't tend to be as high of an impact other than survivability. Her damage can be decent, but Assassin Diona, probably not the best way to go. As much as my artifact luck tells me otherwise. But anywho, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, shall we? Mona! Probably the second best character from the standard banner, and a character that a lot of people would be surprised to see an A. Why is she an A? If she has the single strongest buff in the entire game, comparable to Bennett. The reason why she is an A is because she is very difficult to enable. She's not an easy character that you can get away with just building whatever you want. There are not really that many books that help Mona in this particular department, and her burst Stellaris Phantasm, while incredibly good, doesn't fit well with a lot of the support boosting characters that we have. She finds it almost impossible to get Bennett's buff. Elemental mastery buffs are kind of awkward with her. Vaporize setups are very complex and take a long time. Artifacts don't really mesh well with Mona either, and when it comes to free-to-play weapons, there's not really any. The only real one is the Tales of the Dragon Slayer, which affects her personal damage quite significantly. So more often than not, she ends up just being a support that doesn't do much else other than support. So, while still really good, doesn't really bring that much else to the table other than what other A supports can bring. She brings the Stellaris Phantasm buff, she brings sometimes the Tales of the Dragon Slayer, and that's kind of it. Her energy recharge can be a bit difficult to work with. More often than not, the set that you're going to be going for is the Emblem Sword Fates, which we have established is a very, very expensive set to go for. If you can enable that set, she would probably rise to S, but without that one, she doesn't bring that much. She brings a decent amount of Hydra application, not that strong, but it is there. It's enough to fuel freeze compositions. It's not enough to fuel vaporize compositions. Her CC is decent enough to the point where she brings a lot to the table, just not enough to push her out of A. All around though, she still remains as a very niche character that in the particular setups where she's good, she's incredibly good. Mainly the Morgana setup. If you can get her into that particular setup, she will shine. Everywhere else, she's kind of a very limited buff that tends to only work for one or two characters at most. and her personal damage, while you can get it really high, you will struggle to get it that high. Fairly difficult to build, but all around, probably worth it. Probably worth it. All around, though, kind of hard to put her above A. Especially with just the amount of enemies that can just completely ignore her Stellar Phantasm now. One of the better things about Mona used to be how Stellar Phantasm had a CC attached to it, but that only really works against Hilichurls now. Pretty much everything else just completely ignores it, meaning that the Omen buff is kind of like the only thing that still remains, and a lot of characters also immune that fact, because until the Omen buff procs, which for characters like the Geo Bishops happens quite late, you don't actually get that benefit for a long time. Kind of a weird character that's just teaming on the edge of really, really good, but is missing that ease of setup that other characters have. There's also not that many characters that can take full advantage of Omen. The ones that can typically do so because when an enemy is frozen with the Omen buff, the Omen duration does not change. So if you manage to freeze an enemy, you can extend the duration of Omen for as long as you keep that enemy frozen. That is what makes Mona very powerful in the whale builds that you often see, and that is what makes Mona really powerful in the Morgana team. Without that ability, Omen only lasts for like 4 seconds, and there's very few characters that can take advantage of it. The one that takes the most advantage of it tends to be Futao, and that's kind of it. Every other pyro unit doesn't have that one big buff that makes Omen worth it. Still though, probably one of the stronger ones that you're going to be seeing in a lot of burst compositions and one-shot combos. If you can get to the point where you can enable either the frozen composition or a one-shot combo, Mona holds a lot of value and will probably be an S, but everywhere else, she's kind of just an A character. Alright, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next characters, shall we? There are a lot of characters in A, which is probably a good thing for the health of the game. Not so much for me, who is already very tired. Alright, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next one. And he, if you're playing the Japanese dub, Yanfei for literally everybody else. Yanfei. Just a strong character overall. I don't think she's that weak, but she does have a lot of the same weaknesses that Klee does. Up to that point. Her biggest worry is usually energy generation, and there's not really that many characters that have been able to fix that problem for her. There might be a character in the future that does help her with this. Thoma is looking to be like a really powerful Yanfei support for the future, so that might be one of the things that brings Yanfei up just a tad bit. But as it stands right now, her energy issues do hurt her quite a bit. She does have some of the highest DPS in the game, and her long range makes it so the increased mobility doesn't really affect her that much, but she's very hard to enable. As one of the pyro DPSs, she's probably one of the harder ones to actually get to a proper stage. The one thing that does have her over other characters is that her charge attacks are relatively fast, and they can also be vaporized 100% of the time. They do not have a cooldown for how quickly you can vaporize. As many times as you can charge attack is as many times as you can vaporize with them, which is really good. She does rely a lot on Shincha though, as most pyro DPS do, so it's kind of hard to say use Yanfei over Zhangling. The only other place where Yanfei might be viable is when Zhangling already has another enabler that works well with her. The one thing about Yanfei is that she does not work with other enablers, whereas Zhangling does. You can use Zhangling with Kokomi, you can use Zhangling with Tartaglia, you cannot use Yanfei with anyone other than Shincha. Another character that works well with Yanfei though is Fischl, so if you do manage to get that combination, that might end up being something really good in the future. I can fully see a combination like a well-invested energy recharge Shincha with a strong Fischl and a Thoma and Yanfei being very effective in the future. Right now, she's on the verge of becoming a good character, but there's just not that many things that make her viable right now. The one thing that did buffer quite a bit was the release of the Dodoko Tails. So if you do manage to get that weapon, if you did manage to get that weapon, Yanfei can be very viable. It's just kind of difficult to set her up properly. If you're going for artifact sets, my personal favorite is the Bolite set, since that one boosts both of the damage parts of the kit that you're going to be using the most. Crimson Witch of Flames also works a little bit. I would much rather have the Bolite set though. I do think that that is probably like one of her best in slot, and with the release of Thoma, which I expect to be a good character for Yanfei, that's probably going to cement the Bolite set as Yanfei's personal set. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's talk about another character that takes good advantage of Geo buffs. Ning Wong, often called the free-to-play 5-star. I don't agree with this particular sentiment. Do not get me wrong, I adore my Ning Wong, and I think Ning Wong is incredibly strong, but she does have a lot of issues that do make her a bit less reliable than other characters, even in the free-to-play spectrum. She's incredibly strong, especially in the burst department. If you manage to get her C6, she's probably one of the better bursters out in the game. But she does have a lot of things that are going against her. One of the main issues is that the tracking on her crystals, on her stars, Star Shatter, can be pretty awkward at times. In a lot of places like Abyss, she is very difficult to use because of the way that enemies tend to gather. When you're fighting enemies in Abyss, you tend to gather a lot towards the walls of Abyss, because that's the easiest way of gathering enemies together, and that really hurts. That really hurts Ning Wong. When you're using Ning Wong near a wall, a majority of her damage will get eaten up by that wall, because of the way that Star Shatter works. It gets devoured by obstacles, and Abyss in particular is notorious for not letting her use Star Shatter properly. Were not for that particular quality, she would probably be significantly stronger than she is right now. But it stands right now, she's kind of difficult to use in the hardest content in the game. So while her potential is incredibly high, you don't tend to see that potential a lot. There are ways to use Ning Wong in Abyss, but they're often Abyss dependent, which does make Ning Wong kind of one of those characters that's really good if you can hit the enemy. Hence why she's an A. She's also not super cheap to build, often requiring some of the more expensive weapons to get. So it can be hard to enable a good Ning Wong. If you can enable her and you're fighting an enemy that's good against her, she is probably deserving of the S ranking. I don't think S plus is that high. I don't think she's that good at that department. That does not mean that she's bad. She has a lot of benefits from Geo. There's a lot of characters that she works well with. Albedo being the main one. Shang Lee also being another good one. She's good. She's really good. She's expensive. And she does struggle against certain floors in Abyss and against certain enemies that tend to stick too close to the walls. All around though, probably one of the better burst characters you can enable, especially as a free-to-play player, because a lot of the damage that she gets, she ends up getting just from the amount of times that she hits. If you get her early on, she's much better. Yeah, I can agree with that one. I can agree with that one. It's just, that's one of the things about Ning Wong. She's really good when she's built. She's really good when everything goes her way. It's just, when you have many options available to you, it's hard to choose Ning Wong, because she's only good when she's properly built. And that often requires good weaponry that's not easy to get, good team synergy that's also not easy to get, as well as crit rate ratios that are very difficult to accomplish. I think my Ning Wong is probably at the highest tier of what you can get with a free-to-play build, and even her is only somewhere around the 120 and 120k mark for burst DPS, which is good, but not as strong as what I can enable with characters like Ryden, not as strong as what I can enable with characters like Ayaka, not as strong as what I can enable with other 4-star characters, such as my Bennett or even my Shangling. She's kind of one of those characters that she has one thing that she's really good at, and everything else she kind of falls behind. So, Geo Burster, really, really good. Very niche teammates. Kind of okay if you can manage to get some specific builds. If you manage to get a 5-star weapon for her, she can be really, really good, but she does need that C6 and a C2 at a minimum. I would not play Ningguang without the C2. If you do not have the C2, I cannot recommend Ningguang. Nonetheless, her top potential is pretty high, so she does deserve the A rank. When you have Shang Lee and Ningguang, you become more lazy. I can 100% agree with that. I can definitely see that happening. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's go to the newest character, which we're actually going to be getting in 2.2. Supposedly, assuming that miHoYo didn't forget, I am going to assume that they forgot. But we're supposed to get Alloy in 2.2. I don't trust miHoYo with that. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm going to assume that they're going to forget and that we're not going to get this character. But assuming that we do, Alloy is a pretty good burst character. She's similar to Ningguang in that regard, where she will be a bit expensive, but she does have a lot of potential when it comes to energy generation, especially if you manage to get something like the the sacrificial bow, which does make her elemental skill cooldown a lot less. If you pair her with anemo units that can pull the bombs, mainly Kazuha, I don't know if Sucrose can. I'm pretty sure that Sucrose can. Do not quote me on that one. But mainly these two characters, you can get a lot of benefit from this character. And her burst is honestly fairly strong. If you manage to melt it properly with the assistance of Bennett, you can probably set up a really good melt core with Alloy. She's not really lacking in terms of damage. I think the only thing that she's really lacking is in terms of flexibility. There's not really much else that you're going to be getting out of her. She's kind of like a half-child. She brings the burst damage, but she doesn't really bring anything else other than that. The way that her infusion works is very gimmicky, and you're unlikely to get a lot of benefit out of that. But she does have some attack buffs that she can give the team, which do end up actually mattering, even if they're very small. Depending on the characters that you're using, that very small attack power can actually prove very efficient. All around, just a character that's very centered on what she does. She does one thing, but she does it well. Hence why she's an A. And speaking of doing one thing, but doing one thing really good, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. Kujo Sarah. She is Bennett without the heal. But let me rephrase that. She's a worse Bennett without the heal. But being comparable to Bennett, anytime that you can be compared to Bennett, that's a good thing, considering that Bennett is one of the best characters in the game. What Sarah does is that she has two things. She's an energy battery, and she's an attack buffer. The attack buff is less than Bennett, a lot less than Bennett, but it is still very powerful. Her burst potential is there, but it's not really that good unless you're going very heavily into Electro, which, for a lot of Electro characters, they don't actually want Sarah unless she's at C6. And that's kind of the big issue with Sarah, that she kind of just doesn't fit into many teams, and the ones that she does fit into, she only fits when she's at C6. Otherwise, there's other characters that just do her job better than her, and even characters that will bring more to the table, even without doing her job. In a lot of cases, the damage bonus that you get from Sarah is not going to be more than what you would just get from using like a character like Baido, for example, or using a character like Fischl for that regard. When it comes to Electro supports, we just have so many that are high value, that are very, very strong, that the damage benefit that Sarah brings, the energy regen that she brings, is just not enough to counteract that damage bonus. Her damage bonus is personal. She can only give it to a single person at a time. There are some tricks that you can do to give it to two, but they're very difficult to accomplish in a proper manner, and often just waste more time than if you were just to keep on attacking. So she's in this weird scenario where she is good, but only in specific cases, only in specific teams, and only if the other allies are properly built to a point where they're at an exponential rate. If not, you're oftentimes better just using another character that has more of an off-field presence. However, her attack boost is very strong. Not as strong as others, but still very strong. So I can't really place her below A, since she's still fairly usable, without being too niche. So now let's go ahead and let's move over to the last character in A+. The Geo Traveler. The Geo Traveler is without a doubt the best version of the Traveler. She's the one that has... They are the one that have the most scaling out of the whole bunch, and they're the one that has the most support potential. She has a crit rate buff on the last constellation that you can get for free, and because you can get a lot of the constellations for free, her meteor can actually hit really, really hard, so can the burst. Her scaling is off the charts if you build her properly. She's very comparable to Ning Wong in that regard, but again, kind of expensive in that department. She does have better access to free-to-play weapons like the Anemona Kageuchi, which she can actually pretty much full charge her burst with if you manage to get a higher refinement rank, and she does bring that crit rate buff, which very few characters can enable. Overall, strong character, very strong character, kind of niche, difficult to build, but it has a lot of potential behind it. The one thing that really holds a Geo Traveler back is the lack of good Geo characters that she synergizes with. The only one that she really does at the moment is Shang Lee. And a lot of people don't like her with Shang Lee because the placement of the meteorites are weird. They're awkward. They're hard to use. They're efficient though, so if you do manage to invest into her, not a bad choice, especially early on. Early on, a combination of the Geo Traveler plus Zhangling, Noelle, and Kea. This is kind of like the team that I recommend for most people when they're starting out, since it'll be the team that they will likely be able to take the most advantage of while they're playing the game, until they can get more 5 stars, until they can level up more valuable characters. So being a part of that, not bad at all. Just an overall, generally balanced character, generally good, and can fit into a lot of teams. Gives a little bit of benefit with the Archaic Petra. She can't use Millilith as sufficiently as other characters. I would probably recommend to Archaic Petra. If you're going heavy into her, 2 Petra, 2 Noblesse. Build her the exact same way that you would build a Ning Wong. She will do almost the exact same amount of damage. Especially if you can get her constellations from doing the story and collecting chests. So now, we're done with the characters that can be considered good. Now let's go ahead and move to the characters that are decidedly not good. Starting with one of the characters that pains me the most, Barbara. Barbara is probably one of the characters that has seen the sharpest decrease in power since the beginning of the game to the point that we have right now. And a lot of the characters that are in this category have had the same issues. One of the biggest issues with Barbara has always been that she self-freezes. This character is absolutely beautiful in terms of design. She has a lot of hydro applications, she has a lot of healing, she has a lot of benefits that she can bring to a team. She's very, very strong. She has everything that she needs to be one of the stronger characters in the game. But she freezes herself. And she generates zero energy on her 30-second cooldown elemental skill. These two things have made Barbara almost unplayable since the release of Dragon Spine. The amount of enemies that can trigger freeze has been going up and up and up and up, and they just keep on going up and up and up. The changes to EM that happened have also affected a lot the changes in reactions that just happen in general have also been affecting a lot of different floors, in Abyss in particular, and the fact that a lot of the floors that we see now in Abyss instantly apply some form of element to you make Barbara just so difficult to play. If you're fighting against anything electro-related, Barbara will almost instantly kill your team because Electro Charge just does a significant amount of damage. If you're fighting against anything that has Pyro, let's say the Pyro Kairagi, if you get hit by a single one of those hits, Barbara will double the damage that the enemy does. How many characters do you have that buff enemies? It's just... why? Just why? If it wasn't for these two particular cases, where Barbara does not generate any energy, and she actively sabotages the team, she would probably be an A+ character. Maybe even S, because of how powerful Hydro enablers are, and Barbara is definitely one of the better ones. However, that is not the case, and as it stands right now, she's just too restricted by factors that are completely outside of her control. Barbara is a good character that MiHoYo is actively sabotaging so that she isn't a good character. The only reason why I can think that's the case is because she's free, but I don't even know anymore. I love Barbara to death, but god damn it, every single patch seems to be just a specific nerf to Barbara, just because of the amount of enemies that we keep on getting. Her healing is very strong, and that is the one redeeming factor about her. Her C6 can also revive enemies, and she's one of the few sources of Hydro damage bonus that we have in the game, so she's one of the few characters that can actually buff Shengcho to a reasonable degree. Barbara is... Barbara. She should be so good, but she just isn't. Another thing that Barbara can do is the DPS variant of Barbara, which has actually gained a little bit of traction and has become a bit more favorable in regards thanks to the addition of a couple Pyro characters. I'm mainly looking at Thoma for this one, but again, too expensive, too restrictive, too difficult to use, too gimmicky. It has decent power, kind of comparable to Klee if you believe that, but just too difficult to use. Just way too difficult to use. Cannot recommend it. Barbara goes in B+, because while she still has a lot of negatives, her Hydra application and her healing are just that strong. So, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character. Lisa! Lisa. Lisa has been a character that has had a bit of an interesting path. More often than not, Lisa has not been a weak character, she has just been a slow character, which is kind of like a running theme with a lot of the first characters that we got from Genshin. A lot of the first characters we got were always very slow. A lot of the animations were slow, a lot of the attack patterns were slow, a lot of everything from the starter characters is just slow. Lisa has always had this big problem for her. Her elemental skill takes a very long time to charge, and it leaves her very vulnerable. And as the game has been going faster and faster and faster, this has become an even bigger issue for Lisa. Not to mention that the Electro element has not received the attention that it requires. While Electro has actually been doing really good from a support perspective, the DPS Electro characters have been suffering quite massively, mainly because there's no real way of increasing the damage that these characters can deal. The only real way that we have has been through either personal buffs, like what we see with Ryden, or the existence of elemental resistance reduction, which is what Baido has. This has been the only ways of actually increasing the power of Electro, and the fact that Electro does not have a powerful set that can be abused like the way that Cryo has, and that the Electro Resonance is just one of the weakest resonances, only weaker than the Hydro Resonance, which is practically useless, doesn't really help the case of Electro anymore. Lisa is overall an Electro DPS character. Her scaling is pretty good. Her casting time is absolutely atrocious, and her burst, while powerful, especially because of the defense reduction that she has, she's one of the few defense reduction characters that's actually playable. It's... sorry, not playable, affordable. Affordable. It's kind of difficult to recommend Lisa, at least in her current state. She needs things to go her way if she wants to become a more usable character. Her energy cost is way too high. She struggles with her elemental skill. She could have performed a battery role if her elemental skill wasn't as annoying to use as it currently is. And she does have a lot of support potential with the way that, with being a catalyst user, she can use things like the prototype Amber, as well as the Tales of the Dragon Slayer, to kind of boost the team a little bit more. And she does have a lot of ways that she can benefit the team. It's just they're way too limited, and if you're only using Lisa for those particular things, there's not many characters that can properly take advantage of. The only character that really takes advantage of Lisa at the moment is Eula, and that's kind of it. Everyone else, often they just want a different support. Similar to the lines of Sucrose, similar to the lines of Kokome, even Yanafe for that matter, can provide a similar supporting fashion as to what Lisa can provide. The unfortunate thing about Lisa is that she's just outdated. She's too slow to do anything with that regard, and even her support potential is not really because of her, and it's more just because of what outside factors can enable her to do. The only real team where you're going to be using Lisa is a team that requires access to Superconduct, and that has a very burst-heavy team composition. So, Eula and Shinyan. Yeah, not to mention that. The thing about her burst just being so counterintuitive, where she has high damage while enemies are within the field, but she pushes enemies away. Like, what's the reasoning behind that? It actively sabotages itself. It's kind of like the same thing with Barbara. The character design is honestly really good, but it's just lacking a lot of things. And it's a lot of things that were purposely taken away, or that they were made more difficult to use because she's a free character. At least that's what it makes it seem like. Whether that's the case, we don't truly know, but that's what it seems to be the case. Which is why, if MiHoYo doesn't want that to seem like the case, they should probably try to do something about Lisa. As she stands right now, she's just not worth it. She has a niche application, which is why she's in B+, but God is she's in dire need of work. She's in dire need of love as well. She has been struggling quite a bit. And speaking of struggling quite a bit, let's move over to the couple next characters. Diluc. Used to be cool, man. What happened to you? I'll go ahead and I'll explain pretty much what happened to Diluc. The thing about Diluc is that he's still the same character. Nothing has changed for Diluc. Diluc has not changed a single bit. Not an ounce of DPS has been lost. Nothing of the sort. The main thing that changed for Diluc is that the enemies that we're fighting are now significantly harder than they used to be. They move a lot more. They have a lot more immunity phases. They don't allow you to vaporize quite as easily. They are very difficult to go against, and Diluc is a fairly slow character that relies a lot on being able to hit every single hit of his basic attack chain with a vaporize reaction. That is very difficult to do against today's enemies, and the enemies that we can expect to see in the future. Hence why Diluc seems to have lost DPS. It's not that he has lost DPS, it's just that he's unable to fight enemies in the same way that he used to fight them. Back when the game started, the most difficult thing that you had to fight in Abyss was like, what, the Whooper Flowers? Now you have to fight enemies that keep on multiplying multiple times, that are constantly sapping your health, that are dashing around the battlefield at insane speeds that you can't even get close to, that constantly pepper you with damage as well. Diluc is still the same character, but the enemies that we're fighting are not conducive to the way that Diluc fights. His burst animation takes a very long time, and it doesn't do that much damage in comparison to what other characters can accomplish. And his reliance on his normal attacks for a majority of his damage really hurt him now that he just can't fight these enemies. He doesn't have a way of lockdown. He cannot abuse freeze because he's a pyro character. He's going to be melting pretty much everything. He cannot abuse a lot of CC because a lot of the characters that can provide CC, he can't attack them. Venti is usually one of the ways that people gather enemies together, a lot of the annoying ones, and he just can't hit enemies that are in Venti Burst. The bird can do it, but the bird is super unreliable, and it has a 2-second animation period, one of the longest in the game, pretty much only on par with Shang Lee. And in a game where 2 seconds is the amount of time that it takes one of the F2P wizards to teleport 4 times, you're just not gonna hit them. Same deal with a lot of the enemies in Nasuma, who are just in the 2 seconds that you're releasing the Luke burst, the enemies have already dashed like 7 times around you. There's just no way of fighting with the Luke anymore. And another thing that affects the Luke quite a lot is the amount of F2P enemies that we have increased so far, as well as the enemies that just kind of move around constantly. If you're fighting Sissin mages, the burst, which is by far Luke's current strongest thing that he has going for him, you're not going to be able to hit the wizard. You're going to be hitting the Sissin flies that are just going to be buzzing around you constantly. Luke is in a state where he's not unplayable because of his damage, he's unplayable because of the enemies that we're fighting. He's unplayable because we're playing a game that is auto-targeting, and his bird would rather fight the low-priority enemies rather than the enemy that you actually want to kill. He is low impact because he takes too long. He's low impact because he can't do a majority of his damage against everything that we're currently fighting. That's why Luke has been as low as he has been. It also doesn't help that for the longest time, his best weapon has been the Wolf's Gravestone, which, while strong, kind of unnecessary for Luke. Luke really wants to try to get something that benefits him a lot more, and while the Wolf's Gravestone might originally seem like something on that front, it really isn't enough anymore. We have weapons like the Staff of Homa, we have weapons like the new bow that we're going to be getting, we have weapons like the Mist Splitter. We're missing that one weapon that's going to bring the Luke back into relevance, and even if we do end up getting a weapon like that, it's probably going to be better on other characters than it is on the Luke. As sad as it is, unless the Luke gets some buffs, he's probably never going to be back to the point where he used to be, just because he's a great sword user. Great sword users have been significantly nerfed by the increase in mobility in the game, by the increase in speed that has been going on. Unless you have a way to ignore those weaknesses, like Noelle does, or unless your bursts and abilities are incredibly powerful, like with what we see with Eula and Baido, if you're a Claymore user, you're automatically at a disadvantage. And speaking of being at a disadvantage, let's talk about Keqing. Keqing is not a bad character. She has a lot of things going for her, and a lot of quote-unquote buffs, if you can call them that, have been actually helpful for Keqing. She now has a character like Sarah, which is probably one of the few characters that Sarah actually pairs well with. And she also has a lot of things like the Mist Splitter, which is a weapon that Keqing really likes. But what are the things about these characters? That they're expensive. Mist Splitter is a specific limited banner weapon, and Sarah, the only way that she pairs well with Keqing is if she has the C6. And that's kind of the thing about Keqing at the moment. She is way too difficult to enable, and what you end up getting is just a decent DPS character that has okay gap closing, an okay burst, and admittedly, pretty good charge attacks. Her charge attacks are definitely the thing that make her stand out the most. But as an Electro main DPS, she's lacking that thing that makes her better. The only thing that we can hope for is that Dendro will help her in the future. That's my only hope. I'm not putting too much of an investment into it. Keqing is definitely one of the worst DPS characters that we have at the moment. And when I say worst, it's not that she's bad, it's just that she's not as efficient as other options. There are characters that you will be seeing an immediate result a lot faster than what you will with Keqing. She is incredibly exponential, and she has a lot of weaknesses that go against her in particular. Despite all of this, she is capable of playing, she is capable of being used in the game, she's capable of clearing a lot of the things that you would consider incredibly hard. It's just it takes her a lot to get there. A lot more than other characters, hence why she is seen as the way that she is currently seen. She's not bad, she's actually fairly good. It's just, she's too expensive. So, is the investment worth it? Probably not. I would much rather invest into something else. But if Keqing is the only thing that you have, by all means go for her. She's not that bad. She's not as bad as people make her out to be. Especially now, there's a lot of mobility in the game. Her gap closing ability has been a lot more relevant, and the Electro variant has been picking up a lot of steam thanks to the quote-unquote buffs, if you can call her that, if you can call them that Electro has received. Electro is not in a good place right now for DPS characters. The only ones that are able to get past that have been Baido and Ryden, and the only reason is because their scaling is so much higher than every other option available. So that's why they are okay, while the characters like Lisa and Keqing have been suffering. There's just nothing that buffs them. There is no powerful set that they can abuse. There is no powerful resonance that can help them. There is no powerful one thing that really helps them a lot. The strongest thing they have is the C6 of a subpar character. But, alas, that is kind of the case for Keqing, and another character that suffers in a fairly similar manner is the Electro Traveler. Originally, the Electro Traveler was thought to be fairly good, but the energy recharge problems that they have are... they're just too much. This is a battery that requires a battery. It's not that good. They have a lot of potential in specific teams, mainly the one with Zhangling and Tartaglia, but apart from that, they're kind of just there, and it's kind of hard to want to invest into them. The energy generation that you can get from the elemental skill is actually pretty good. The burst is mediocre at best, but it does do its job. Not as good as other characters, but it is there. And it does help a little bit into some niche, very niche teams. So she does end up getting a B+, because the benefits that she brings are substantial, they are good, and they have some merit to them, but they're just too hard to enable. You oftentimes need like 250% energy recharge just to be able to use the burst at a consistent rate, and even at that degree, there's a lot of people that still don't think it's enough, and you often need to have 2 Electro characters in order to make it worth it. So at that point, for a battery, kind of difficult to use. Oftentimes you will see them in mostly triple reaction compositions as a replacement for Ryden. Other than that, they're not even a replacement, it's just more like a stand-in, really. Cheap knockoff. However you want to call it. They're there. They exist. They kind of work. But you would like to replace them with something better almost immediately. So that's kind of the thing with a Traveler. And that is kind of something that we're going to be seeing for the other 2 characters that we're going to be seeing here, which we're going to be moving over to B. This character, frankly, they're just too expensive to make them work. We're going to start with Xinyan, which is one of the characters that I actually think has the highest potential in the entire game, because Xinyan at C2 has an ability that says, you gain 100% crit rate. That is an absolutely insane ability that, if you can enable it properly, can make it so that Xinyan can easily hit for 500,000 damage. However, that is incredibly expensive, and unless you have been running artifacts for literal months, heck, even years, might be a more reasonable degree, you're just not gonna get that amount of crit damage. She really needs that crit damage, and she needs to have the physical artifacts to make it worth. You also need a C2, and you also need a team that can enable physical resistance shred. You need multiple constellations to make it work, you need specific teams to make it work, you need specific artifacts to make it work, with specific crit damage stats. She is undoubtedly one of the most expensive characters to build properly, but she does have some of the highest payoff because of that. And in the future, we might even be seeing even more buffs to Xinyan, mainly in the form of a better greatsword for her to use. She's a really good character, but goddammit if she's not expensive. I think she is probably one of the most expensive 4-star characters in the game. Pretty much in every single regard that you can imagine it, which is why a lot of people don't use Xinyan, and why a lot of people don't see the value of her, because the amount of investment is just ridiculous. I think the payoff is worth it, but at the moment she is probably lacking that one weapon that's really gonna make that payoff reasonable, even for whales. So that's kind of the deal with Xinyan. A lot of potential, but she has been completely ignored by MiHoYo, the community, and pretty much everyone. I still think that she has a lot of value that's just waiting to be tapped, but it is admittedly way too expensive for me to recommend to almost anybody. Unless you have a C6 Xinyan already, and you have a lot of very powerful crit damage artifacts, you're probably not going to be taking advantage of Xinyan. Unless you have a Eula comp as well. It's just so much that she needs. She's way too niche. You can make her work, you can make her incredibly powerful, but it's just so much. So much for what's admittedly just a burst support. Alas, if you do like Xinyan, there is a path. It's just not a pretty one. And on the same regard, let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character, Chi-Chi! A character that has the same problems that Barbara does. She has a very long elemental skill that produces no energy, and unlike Barbara, who actually does have innate buffs, Chi-Chi doesn't. The only thing that Chi-Chi provides is healing. Pure healing. Her healing is probably the strongest in the game, in all honesty. Admittedly, she's definitely the strongest healer. But that's it. And healing, you only need a small amount of it. You don't need that much. Chi-Chi massively overheals everything. And since that's the only thing that she brings to the table, it's already something that's very low value. A lot of teams can often get away with just the healing that Shincha provides. And Shincha provides like 4,000 healing every 15 seconds? Chi-Chi can instantly heal every single teammate in like half a second. But you just don't need that in Genshin. And even with the increase in damage that we have seen, even with the increase in annoying mechanics like corrosion, her healing is just complete overkill. And sacrificing all of the utility that other characters can bring for that overkill of healing is just not worth it. With that in mind though, the one thing that Chi-Chi does have going for her is that she's a cryo character that can effectively use the Aquila Favonia and use a very strong physical damage build. That is the one thing that she has going for her, because she is almost unkillable with the amount of healing that she has. If you pair her with a character like Xingqiu, which can provide her with stagger resistance, she is practically unkillable. So that is the one thing that she has going for her, but that requires, again, say it with me, specific teammates, a 5-star rank weapon, specific artifacts with specific crit rate ratios, just a lot of investment. Hence, why she is here. If the investment was any cheaper, she would probably make it to B+. I don't think she would ever make it to A. But yeah, as since right now, she really needs a buff, man. If I were to put my 2 cents in, make it so that enemies that are affected by her talisman either take increased damage, similar to an Omen buff, or if you attack an enemy that has that, you have increased crit rate. Either one of those would instantly shoot up Chi-Chi a lot higher than what she is right now. And the other thing that she absolutely needs, give her energy generation, for Christ's sake. She has a 24-second elemental skill, the second longest in the game, and she generates 0 particles as a support character? Why? Just why? It's like MiHoYo is actively trying to kill the popularity of this character. Which, I mean, I guess after the anniversary might be on purpose. So, that's kind of cheating. Now, I've been pretty rough on a lot of these characters, and I'm gonna be even rougher on the characters we're gonna be talking about right now. So if you like Racer, this is probably a good time to mute me. Because we're gonna be talking about Racer next. I'm gonna give you the sad reality of Racer. He's not good. He is not good anymore. Just plain and simple, the game has outgrown Racer. And it is not Racer's fault. In a very similar fashion to Diluc, he just struggles fighting the current enemies that we have to fight right now. There's a lot of enemies that are flying around. Even the increase in attack speed does not help Racer. He has a lot of very long cooldowns. He has a lot of very long animation times. He has a lot of phases that are very difficult for him to deal with. He has a lot of energy issues in order to be able to trigger his attack speed state. There's not that many ways for him to synergize properly with the physical damage characters that we currently have, and he often relies on very expensive characters in order to do a majority of his damage, for what's ultimately not that great of DPS. A character like Kokome, which is widely currently being regarded as a laughingstock in terms of DPS, doubles, and I'm being serious here, doubles Racer's DPS. If Kokome is trash by the current community standards, don't tell them about Racer, because they're going to devour him alive. Racer, he has just fallen out of a failure. He is not that good. Not anymore. He was really good in the past. The game has just changed too much for him. There are practically no ways of making Racer viable anymore. You can still play him if you want, but you're gonna struggle in Abyss. You might be able to beat it, you might even be able to 36 star it, but a majority of that will not be up to Racer, and it will often be because of the supports that are in S+. That is the reality of Racer. He's just not that great anymore. Alright. Let's go ahead and let's move over to... Oh god, I'm getting really tired. Let's go ahead and let's move over to the next character that I'm going to be ripping into. Chongyun. Chongyun had his 5 minutes of fame with the natural composition, but it was quickly discovered that Chongyun was not really that efficient in that regard, as was something that I mentioned when that composition started becoming popular. Chongyun's 5 minutes of fame were regarded because his burst dealt a decent amount of damage when it was melted, and his ability to have a cryo infusion on other characters was really helpful against specifically the Abyss Herald. That is still Chongyun's only claim to fame, and when it comes to melt damage, there are other characters that can do that job significantly better than him, and when it comes to cryo infusions, there are other characters that can also do that job significantly better than him, one of which we're going to be getting for free in the form of Alloy in the next patch. He is no longer free-to-play accessible. There is a free character that everybody's going to be getting that does his job better than him. And even the best composition that he currently had does better without him in it. The only other thing that Chongyun had going for him was an admittedly very strong shatter composition that actually worked really well for them. He had a very strong composition in that particular regard. There are shatter compositions that actually work fairly decent with him, even if he's not getting the full amount of power from Blizzard Strayer. He's still getting enough to the point where it was worth running, and he did get a little bit of a boost in that particular regard. His shatter composition was not bad. Being able to use Shincha and Chongyun together alongside certain particular units that worked really well, it did its job, and it worked fairly decently. However, a lot of the characters that enabled that are also some of the best characters in the game. So using those characters to enable a character like Chongyun was often seen as, not often, it was heavily, heavily inefficient. And that's kind of the thing that has remained true for Chongyun. He has a favorable element. He has favorable things that go for him. Shatter actually does a decent amount with him. He can boost his cryo damage to a fairly decent amount. It's just the characters that enable Chongyun enable so many other characters that using them to enable Chongyun, even at C6, is just not worth it. The damage difference is not enough, and he still has a lot of the weaknesses that the other characters that we have seen continue having. Chongyun should be better than what he is. But with the way that Genshin has evolved, he is unlikely to see any sort of fame other than as a way of dealing with Hydra Shields. His potential has been almost entirely stripped and pretty much left only as a cryo infuser. Which is really sad, because this character is really fun. But in terms of investment, he's definitely not the way to go. Man, that was very difficult. So before we rip into the last two characters, let me go ahead and read a little bit of the chat, which I've not been keeping up with, unfortunately. I apologize. Nancy, you just got Kaching in August, and she covers a lot of space. Yeah, that's one of the good things about Kaching. She's really good, as I mentioned. It's just the amount of investment that she requires is often not enough. But she has a lot of really good teams, and she has a lot going for her. If Electro gets buffed in any capacity, I expect Kaching to rise up really, really quickly. I just don't know if Mihoyo is going to do that anymore. I'm hoping for Dendro, but I'm not hoping too much. In my opinion, Chi-Chi should never be under Barbara. They both are in the team to heal. Chi-Chi heals better and does not sabotage your team at all. The reason why Barbara is better than Chi-Chi at the moment is primarily for freeze compositions. At the moment, there are a lot of really powerful cryo characters that are in dire need of Hydra enablers, and Barbara as a Hydra enabler is one of the better ones, hence why she is above Chi-Chi. The only reason that Barbara is above Chi-Chi right now is because Barbara is one of the most valuable elements in the game, and she is a Hydro Catalyst user, which means that she can enable a lot of different buffs that Chi-Chi just can't. If we compare them, when we put Barbara in a team, she can still provide things like the Prototype Amber, which at max rank gives 18 energy. She can still provide things like the Tales of the Dragon Slayer book, which can provide a significant amount of damage buffs, alongside her own stamina consumption buff, which, while it might not seem like much, it does allow you to dodge 2 more extra times if you're dodging a lot, and for a lot of teams, it also allows you to diminish the need for stamina by quite a decent amount. The main thing as to why Barbara is at B+ over Chi-Chi comes down to the buffs that she can enable, as well as the compositions that she can work with. If you have an Ayaka, for example, the usage of Barbara is likely to go up until you get something better. On the other side, while Chi-Chi should also be able to enable cryo compositions, the compositions that would be enabled by that are oftentimes not that efficient. The only one that really works with Chi-Chi for proper freeze composition is with Shincha, and that is for the Chi-Chi physical build, where you're using Shincha, Chi-Chi, as well as some form of electro character to trigger superconduct once, only once, oftentimes that being Lisa, and then you have some form of shielder or additional support that doesn't break Frozen. That's the composition where Chi-Chi shines in the most, and that is the composition where she fits in the most, which is also incredibly expensive, since more often than not, you're using your Shengqiu, which is one of the most valuable supports at the moment. You need to have a good weapon for Chi-Chi, oftentimes that being the Aquila Favonia. You need to have invested into that other character, oftentimes, as I mentioned, Lisa. And then the third character can be kind of whatever. So that one's not that big of a deal. But that's kind of the thing about Chi-Chi. She does have a team. She is good. That's why she's in B. But the amount of investment that you require for her is just way, way too heavy. And she has zero flexibility to speak of. If I did not explain that properly, my bad. I am really tired. I can feel myself losing my voice. I've been talking for 3 hours nonstop. I'm also really hungry. Also, Racer is really good if you're getting early enough. Yeah, Racer early enough is not that bad of a deal. A lot of his problems only really show up when you go into Abyss and in Asuma. Early on, he was still really powerful. Like early on, Racer was one of the better characters, similar to Diluc. A lot of people touted Racer as these powerhouse 4-star, and for what it wasn't a lie. He was very strong. It's just the game has evolved to such a point that he gets power crept. He just got power crept. That's kind of it. It's not even power creep really. It's more mobility creep, if you really think about it. Lockdown creep. And I just don't see any way for Racer to come back from it. He is a part of the worst element in the game, a part of one of the least valuable weapon types in the game, and he's also a character centered around the least viable damage ability, that being the normal attack. So he just has everything going against him. Even his elemental skills are just not really enough for him to make a niche for himself. The one thing that he could potentially do in the future is like maybe a Wolf's Gravestone C4 defense reduction electro battery. But that just sounds expensive as hell, with no real reason to use that over Lisa. Racer, I don't even know what you would need in order for Racer to be good. We already have like a custom weapon that would work with Racer, and even that doesn't really increase his damage by that much. He's still lower than Kokome in pretty much every single regard, while still being doubly as expensive. And if the community is anything to go by, if you consider Kokome to be bad, then I'm sorry. I'm just sorry if you're a Racer fan. I like him as well, but he's just not viable. Not anymore. Not anymore. He's still fun to play with, but if you're trying to use him on Abyss, the only thing that I can tell you is best of lucks. You haven't seen Shongyun's newfound fame after the anniversary. Reason why Amber is D tier. Amber, there you go. Pretty much. I want to do like a full analysis on Amber because there are some things that should be okay, but it just doesn't work. How about Nuke Racer with electro damage? See, the thing is, even Nuke Racer with electro damage where you EQ into the E, the damage, because you would have to be using the full version, that would take you like 5 seconds. And 5 seconds for 800% scaling, that's nothing. That's literally like two Ganyu arrows. 2 procs of Pyronado for Zhangling, which only takes like 3 seconds, and can be off-field damage. It's just not enough. He does not have the scaling necessary, he does not have the element necessary, he does not have the flexibility necessary, he does not have the weapon access necessary. Racer at the moment is in such a poor condition. Worse than Chi-Chi, worse than Shen Yan. It pains me to put him here. It pains me to put him here, but it's just the reality of the matter. And it's kind of sad, really. I don't even know how you would go about buffing him. Physical damage is already one of the most buffed elements in the game for Eula to be valuable. And there just isn't anything. There's nothing that can be done about Racer. There's nothing that can be done about Racer other than literally changing the game. He's a lost cause at this point. I have zero hopes for him. I honestly have better hopes that Amber will get a buff than Racer will. kind of the same thing with Chongyun. I think Chongyun has, unfortunately, because of the way that his kid works, he's pretty much going to be relegated entirely to a cryo infusion. There is no more value that can be taken out of Chongyun other than that. Which is sad because again, he was actually pretty fun to play, and his shadow composition, when I was testing that out, it was actually some of the most fun that I've had. Just not viable enough. Just not viable enough, unfortunately. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and let's move over to the two most disastrous characters that I consider in Genshin. We're going to be talking about the Anemo Traveler, and we're going to be talking about Amber. Anemo Traveler. She's not an Anemo character, so she can trigger very decent Venereer. So the C rating might not be that necessary. It might actually be more fair to put the Travelers in B tier. I will say that right now. But the Anemo Traveler has probably one of the worst kits in the entire game. Pretty much nothing synergizes with anything, and the only reason why they could even be relatively playable would be because they have a small pull on the E that can trigger Venereer set. And it does have a decent amount of sword weight. You can make a viable build for the Anemo Traveler because of this. But this build will be so expensive in terms of the things that you need that were you to put it on literally every other Anemo character in the game, you would be almost tripling your damage. That is just the case with the Anemo Traveler. They are here not because they are poor. They're a poor character that can't be used. They're here because every other available option from their element almost doubles, if not triples, the efficiency of the team. Hence why they are in C. They are, without a doubt, the bottom of the Anemo element. Which, funny enough, might still be higher than a couple of the Electro characters. I'm sorry, Razor. I really want you to be good. I'm sorry, Chongyun. I really want you to be good. But you're just not. Alas, that is the reason why the Anemo Traveler is here. Elemental skill has a very long cooldown. It does generate a decent amount of energy particles, but when we take the entire element into account, it's just not enough. Very expensive build that requires a decent amount of not only elemental mastery, but also a full set of Venereer, as well as a decent amount of crit rate and crit damage. Very hard to accomplish. And the burst... If the burst was stationary, this would actually be really good, and they would probably be an A, if not even A+. It is not stationary, it moves away from the enemies, it does not pull a lot of things, it makes it really hard to fight the enemies. The Anemo Absorption, while it can deal a decent amount of damage, almost never triggers in a satisfactory degree. It pushes the enemies away from you, you can't hit them, difficult to control, high energy cost, everything that you do not want on a character, the Anemo character has. Their constellations are also absolutely hilarious. The C6 gives you one tick of Anemo damage at the end of the attack chain. That is literally a spit in the face. It doesn't even give you an infusion, it gives you one tick of Anemo damage. It's so bad. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's move over to the worst character in the game, which should not be a surprise to absolutely anybody. Off in the distance, I'm not even going to circle her. She's literally the only one here. Amber. She's Amber. What do you want me to say? She is a part of the worst class in the game, with the worst DPS timers, with the worst ability, with the worst burst in the game. She has everything that you do not want. You cannot make a worse character if you try. If you try to take the worst of everything this game has to offer, the addition is Amber. She has the worst burst, the worst elemental skill, the worst mechanic for damage on one of the worst classes. She has nothing going for her. The one thing that is a saving grace for Amber is the fact that there are actually some decent bows. There is the Elegy of the End, and her C6, the C6 by the way, gives 15% attack boost to a party after she uses her burst. That's the C6. So a C6 Amber with Elegy of the End does have some form of support potential. If you have this particular build, which requires her C6 of the free characters that only appear on the standard banner, as well as a limited time event, Elegy of the End, which has not had a rerun, and we're not expected to see a rerun of this bow for a very, very long time, you can probably put her in A. Even with the most favorable situation for Amber, she would only climb to A. And even that is probably pushing it. It's disappointing, really, because her design is not that different from Ganyu's design, and it doesn't really take that much to make Amber viable. If you want me to make the least changes possible that would make Amber the most viable possible, this is what you do. You remove the internal reaction cooldown on her charge attacks. This is nothing new, Ganyu has that already. And you make it so that whenever you activate her burst, she gains 60% increased charge rate on her charge attacks. Again, nothing new. This is something that Diona already has. You give her this for like, I don't know, 12 seconds. Let's say 12 seconds. Amber instantly becomes viable, she actually becomes useful, and there are builds that would work for her. Because while her charge attacks might be a meme, they are only a meme because of how long they take to charge. She is a charge attack centered archer, which is goddamn horrible. I cannot think of something worse in this game. It literally takes scaling breaking amounts of AoE damage for that class to be good. Look at Ganyu. But this particular change would do something similar to that and would actually make her relatively okay. She would not be busted. She would not be crazy. She would just be okay, but she would be playable. And that is much more than what we can hope for at the moment. Those are like the two changes that are the most immediate, easiest to do, that would actually make Amber viable. Because at that point, with a 60% increase, her charge attack would only take like 0.8 seconds. And if you manage to get her with a character like Kokome or Amber, she could actually vaporize a significant amount of her charge attacks, which would mean that her scaling would be at a reasonable rate. It would not be busted. It would be reasonable. And it would be playable at a bare minimum. Her elemental skill is a lost cause. It is. It is so bad. You might be able to make it better if you increase the HP that it has, or if you make it immune like Mona's and make it so that it triggers Pyro. I don't even think that would be that good. The only way to make it better would be like doubling the scaling and increasing the HP. That would probably be the only way of making it viable. And even then, it would still be only okay-ish. She could be Electro. That is true. She could be Electro. Honestly, I'm not even gonna lie. Even an Electro Amber would probably be more efficient, because at that point she could trigger Superconduct. Even Electro Amber would be better than the current Amber that we have right now. That is so disappointing to think about. But it would be true. Oh my god. What do we do with Amber? What do we do with Amber? Amber isn't the Amber tier. Very, very special. I'd like to see 100% crit rate upon manually triggering Bear and Bunny. Oh, that would be good. That would actually be really good. Would it be busted? Probably not. If it's on a single hit, that wouldn't be that bad. Like, if you pop Bear and Bunny, the next charge like that you do has 100% crit. I mean, you can kind of already get that with precision hits, so it might not be that busted. It might not be that crazy, actually. Never mind. God, there really is, like, no way of making Amber better other than literally changing her entire kit, is there? I think the way that I put it is probably the best that I can think of, but I can't really think of anything that would be beneficial for her. It's just, there is nothing that she can do. She's just Amber. It's Amber. We'll leave her as the waifu. That's pretty much all she can do at the moment, which is fairly disappointing because I actually like her design quite a lot. I think she has a really good design that fits her personality really well. That's a really good option for one of the star characters. She's the character that introduces you to the world. So her being this useless is just sad. Especially when the manga version of Amber is so cool and badass. And then we have the Amber in game, which is goddamn useless. But anywho, with that out of the way, I've been streaming for 3.5 hours. I definitely need to take a break. If you enjoyed, thank you very much for watching. And this is Portals. Signing out.